mother of all talk shows is back. Unleashed, unabridged, uncensored, and unbelievable. Only on Sputnik Radio.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
Welcome to the mother of all talk shows, to the Open University of the Airwaves, the College of Knowledge, where there are absolutely no tuition fees and where you are positively encouraged to speak back to the teacher. We'll be talking to guests from the corridors of power in Washington, where Donald Trump looks to be in ever deeper trouble. We'll be talking to a guest from the streets of Bolivia, where the beloved president, Evo Morales, was brutally bundled out of power in a military coup. And we'll be talking about Prince Andrew, a prince among men, a prince of the pizza parlor. He underwent potential trial by television at his own request last night. How did you think he did? Myself, for a man that says he can't sweat, he looked like he was sweating to me. Now, you can listen to us all over the world, 105.5, 105.5 FM in the Washington, D.C., on AM across the U.S., on SputnikNews.com. But you can also watch us on Facebook, on Twitter, and on YouTube. It's the mother of all talk shows, rock and roll radio with pictures.
The mother of all talk shows with George Galloway. The world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
This is London, but of course you can be watching and listening to this show all over the world. Again, more than 500,000 people watched or listened to all or part of last week's show. If you are watching on Facebook, please share it with all of your friends, because I want to get to the magic number of 1 million. I have just flown to Pakistan and back over the course of 3 days. Madcap, even by my standards. That's why I wasn't standing up for the entree, but my mind is as sharp as ever. We're going to be talking about Prince Andrew. In fact, there's a poll. Did you find Prince Andrew's testimony on the television in Britain last night to be persuasive? I don't know the exact words of the poll, but it'll be coming up on the screen. I only saw it on my telephone. I didn't see it on a bigger screen, but it looked pretty toe-curlingly, cringe-worthy, agonizingly stupid an idea for a member of the royal family to undergo, at his own request, trial by television at the hands of Emily Maitlis. For those done certain as, not since It's a Royal Knockout has there been a more excruciating royal performance than this. Let me summarize his position. He has no recollection whatsoever of ever meeting the 17-year-old girl who alleges that he more than once had sex with her, even though there's a picture of him with his arm around her and her arm around him, with Ghislaine Maxwell, daughter of the late Robert Maxwell, grinning in the foreground. The picture is said to have been taken at Ghislaine Maxwell's London apartment. Now, it's possible that pictures can be faked, of course, and if it is Prince Andrew's position that that's not him in that picture, at least not with her, then that's one thing. But the reasons he gave for not actually having done this filthy deed of participating in what was the illegal trafficking of a young girl underage from the United States to London for immoral purposes, a crime under American law, his reasons why he have to be innocent border on the bizarre. He tells us that he couldn't have done this because he was in Pizza Express in Woking. Now, it is safe to say that no member of the royal family of Britain, the House of Windsor, the former House of Hanover, has ever come up with that excuse before. It's almost certainly true that no member of the royal family has ever been in Pizza Express. I myself am a fan of Pizza Express, but I've never seen a royal in there. With his daughter for a party, he said. But in any case, that was only at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. How does that negate the allegation that you went to Tramp nightclub later that evening and you sweated profusely before having sex with that woman? Now, he says that at that time, he couldn't sweat. He didn't sweat because of some adrenaline reaction when he was a war hero in the Falklands War. He was shot at, and that this triggered something in his system that meant that he couldn't sweat. There's no way of knowing, of course, now at this distance, if that is true or not. He certainly was sweating last night. Most journalists and broadcasters, and I include myself in that, think it was a very stupid thing to do, to put himself up with no legal protection, no legal procedure for trial by television. But the question is, do you believe him? Here's the poll now up. Do you believe Prince Andrew's account of events? So far, 7% say yes and 93% say no. Moving on to another man with problems that are not entirely dissimilar. Boris Johnson's erstwhile technology teacher, you know, the one in Shoreditch whom he was visiting several hours an afternoon when he was the Mayor of London, but not putting it in his official diary. The woman who was teaching him about the hard drive and the RAM rate and spreadsheets and all of that. Miss Arcuri has come to England to conduct a speaking tour throughout the duration of the rest of this British general election. What could possibly go wrong? It is alleged, and the police are now investigating, that this woman received vast sums in public largesse to which she may not have been entitled, and that she travelled on official trade delegations when she had no right to be on the aeroplane, and that it's difficult to separate those two facts from the fact that she was the intimate teacher on technology matters of the then Mayor of London, whose grants and whose aeroplanes these were. Now, it's a pity we have to put it this way, but this is a woman scorned. She says in the papers today that she is being treated shabbily by the cad, the mountebank, the bounder, Boris Johnson, now, of course, Prime Minister. That will come as no surprise to many a woman and her husband, cuckolded by Boris Johnson over the years, even children fathered whilst the mother was in wedlock with someone else. Now, the fact that he's a cad, a bounder, a mountebank will come as a surprise to nobody. But he is skating on very thin ice. When this woman called him more than once, he immediately hung up on her. He refused to talk to her. And so she's now saying, I'm being treated like some kind of one-night stand, when Boris knows exactly that that is not true. So I think there may be trouble ahead for Boris Johnson on this front. The police have helpfully said that they'll give a verdict on whether charges or other measures need to be brought on the Arcuri business after the general election. Most people would think in a general election, as long as this one, it might have been possible to get at least some preliminary findings out into the public domain before the general election. on the basis that it's quite important that the British people know who really is their Prime Minister and what his character really is, his conduct really has been. Donald Trump, another fellow out of the same stable, you may think, is in a different kind of trouble. The Democrats controlling the House of Representatives have begun what looks ominously like a process that will lead to the passing of impeachment resolutions in the House of Representatives, and perhaps very quickly indeed. It's all about Ukraine Gate and Russia Gate and girls wetting themselves through excitement in Moscow hotel rooms at the prospect of being in the company of Donald J. Trump before he became President of the United States. It's sordid, murky, dirty waters, if you'll forgive the pun, but it is going forward. Now, it seems to me that the Republicans cannot possibly allow this impeachment process to succeed in the Senate, which is where the trial of Donald Trump will take place. They can't, because this would be their own destruction too in the run-up to a presidential election, and when so many of them are also facing threats to their legislative careers. But there may come a point at which Donald Trump is so damaged goods that the Republicans will calculate that they should ditch him and find someone else before the presidential election next year. We'll be talking to the peerless Chris Hedges, the journalist, author, activist, broadcaster, and that does him no justice, that resume. He is one of the hottest journalistic properties in the United States. So we'll be talking to him shortly about the Donald Trump affair. And we'll be talking to a young woman in Bolivia. The events this week in Bolivia have broken the hearts not just of the indigenous people of Bolivia and throughout Latin America, but broken the hearts of millions around the world who'd grown to know and love the president, the legitimate, rightful president of Bolivia, Evo Morales. The coup, when it came, was bloody, but not as bloody as it may yet get. They forced Evo Morales to resign, and they forced him to flee to Mexico. They burned down his house. They burned down his sister's house. They tarred and feathered and threatened to murder mayors and other senior municipal officials loyal to President Evo Morales. And now they're gunning down Morales supporters on the streets of Bolivia in significant numbers, and an uptick in that violence is to be expected. Whether it will ever reach the levels of violence we've seen in France over the last exactly 1 year, we'll have to wait and see. But you may be surprised if you watch the mainstream media that almost no coverage of the horrific, violent clashes between the state forces of President Macron and hundreds of thousands of his own people has been shown or broadcast on the British media. I'm not entirely sure why. Some people think there's a D notice, that the government have told the media not to produce that footage in the British media, presumably for fear that it might catch on here. No one has proved that point to me sufficiently for me to accept that yet. Certainly, no one has ever handed me a D notice, and if they did, I'd go to Trafalgar Square and read it out from the plinth. So perhaps they imagined I was a lost cause, but I have not yet met anyone else who has been served a D notice. That leaves open then only the possibility that the journalists, if that's what we can call them, are themselves deliberately suppressing events of great moment that are taking place just 29 miles away from here, where I sit in England. The same journalists have flown across half the world, more than half, to Hong Kong to endlessly report on less violent altercations between protesters and state forces there. So it's not that they don't have the money to cross the channel. It's not that they don't have the stamina to investigate what's happening in France. It's that they have decided not to. And we'll be joined tonight by a yellow vest, a guest from the streets of France, who's not only a yellow vest, but an activist for Julian Assange, which is the proximate reason why he's here in England this weekend. Julian Assange may well come up in the course of the next, 2 hours and 40 minutes or so. You can call me. The UK number is 02077 982 255, or from the US on 001 757 744 4480. You could tweet me, of course, at George Galloway, at RTUK News. You can watch us on all these platforms, on YouTube, on Facebook, and on Twitter. You can listen online at SputnikNews.com. And if you're in the US, you can even catch us on FM 105.5 in the Washington, D.C. area. It's the mother of all talk shows.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
By Any Means Necessary is your guide to the movement and efforts shaping the world around us, from mass incarceration.
No longer am I interested in or concerned with prison reform. I am interested only in the eradication of prisons.
To the battle between police and water protectors.
It was a pretty punishing disregard for the sanctity of human life, that unleashing water cannons on peaceful, prayerful water protectors.
From efforts to protect the environment.
The climate movement is ready to, with plenty of opposition research and force and strength, along with, the right of both science and morality, to fight them on this.
To the movement for Black Lives.
When I first saw the Michael Brown video, and I saw that it clearly contradicted the narrative put forth by the Ferguson Police Department and by police supporters in general, 3 words came to mind: color me shocked.
Stay tuned to By Any Means Necessary, 5 days a week here on Radio Sputnik. Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com.
George Galloway and the mother of all talk shows. Join us at the College of Knowledge, where there are no tuition fees.
We are talking.
24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
You are listening.
We give you the most essential out of the endless information space.
Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
The mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. Only on Sputnik Radio.
Do you believe Prince Andrew's account of events? Yes, 5%. No, 95%. So far, not looking like the successful incursion into trial by television Andrew may well have been advised that it would, though it seems to me whoever advised them of that was having a laugh. 226 votes so far. Yes, 5% of you believe Prince Andrew. And to those 5%, I say, I have a bridge here in London. I can sell you going cheap. We'll be talking to Chris Hedges, journalist, writer, broadcaster, and activist very soon. Later in the show, we'll do the On This Day feature, as always. And next week on the show, let me tell you, we have campaigner, GP, and film producer Dr. Bob Gill, who's about to launch his new film, The Great NHS Heist, lifting the lid of how our National Health Service has been robbed from us. He is a completely indefatigable campaigner, Dr. Bob Gill. And if you visit movie.thegreatnhsheist.com before the 30th of November release date and use the discount code MOATS, you can pre-order the film for rental or purchase with a 20% discount. If you want to be at the premiere, then get your tickets at Eventbrite. I'm hoping myself to be at the premiere, but I have absolutely no doubt at all that this is going to be a brilliant new film by Bob Gill, by Dr. Bob Gill. Now, Donald Trump never seems to have been out of trouble since he got elected. First it was the Russia Gate, then it was the Pussy Gate, then it was the Ukraine Gate. He's been going through gates for the entirety of his first term as United States president. Will he get a second term? Well, many informed observers think that if he's left alone and allowed to contest a new presidential election, that he will, in fact, be able to be re-elected. And that might be the reason why the Democrats are determined to put him out of the game before he reaches the starting lineup. I myself thought at the beginning, and said so here at the beginning, that so crazed, unhinged was this Ukraine Gate story, that I thought it was the opposite of what the story ought to have been. The real story was Joe Biden, not Donald Trump. But it seems to have found traction and legs and may very well succeed, at least in the House of Representatives. Let's get the expert testimony of Chris Hedges, journalist, broadcaster extraordinaire. Chris, welcome to the mother of all talk shows.
Thank you, George.
Tell me, is Donald Trump in very serious trouble?
You'd have to see significant defections within the Senate, within the Republican Party in the Senate. And I think it's certainly there is a sentiment within the Republican Party establishment, despite the kind of fealty they pay to Trump. There's a deep anti-Trump sentiment. Whether that will break through in impeachment, I don't know. But I think we should be clear about what's happening here. This isn't about reinstating the rule of law. This is really driven by the deep state. Who's the deep state? These are the bankers, the corporatists, the lobbyists, the intelligence agencies, the government bureaucrats, the military, the technocrats, who have turned on Trump because of the mismanagement of empire. It's very hard to trumpet yourself as the guardian of liberty and democracy and freedom when you have Trump blathering on incoherently about himself, inciting racist violence, insulting and alienating our traditional allies, along with his belittlement of the judicial system in the United States, the press, the Congress, misspelled, tweeted inanities that come out, as well as his impulsive sabotaging of bipartisan foreign and domestic policy. But his greatest sin, and his perhaps most unforgivable sin in the eyes of the deep state, has been his criticism of the endless wars in the Middle East, even though, of course, he lacks both the intellectual and organizational skills to do anything about it. That, I think, is what has sent the deep state out for the jugular. That's what this impeachment process is about. Of course, we saw 2 years with the Mueller investigation, turned out to be a dud. There was no collusion. They have seized on the transcript of this phone call to the president of Ukraine. And of course, they're very carefully, Nancy Pelosi and others, describing this as bribery. You'll hear that term constantly coming out of the mouths of the Democratic Party leadership, because bribery is, under the Constitution, an impeachable offense. Yes, I think, George, you're very right to bring up the corruption of the Bidens. And let's not forget that before Hunter Biden worked for a gas company for $50,000 a month, I mean, what else do you call it? but legalized bribery. He was an executive in one of the major credit card companies in Delaware when his father was a senator. Most of our credit cards for tax reasons are based in Delaware. So yes, they have completely ignored the deep corruption within the Democratic Party establishment, which is epitomized by Hunter Biden itself. But that's what this impeachment is about. It is about the deep state removing Trump because he is mismanaging the handling of empire.
A brilliant tour of the horizon, Chris. Thank you for that. Now, it'll pass the House of Representatives. I originally did not think that it would even be put. Now I think it'll be passed. And then it's about whether the Republicans stay firm. If they stay firm, he cannot actually be impeached, though it will cast a big shadow over the presidential election campaign next year. How would you calibrate the risks to Trump of the Republicans concluding that this man is too much trouble, more trouble than he's worth, and we ought to ditch the pilot and find a new one?
Well, the new one would be Mike Pence, and this is the anointed candidate of the Christian right, the Christian fascists, as I call them. I don't use that term lightly. I graduated from seminary. I come out of a religious tradition. I don't know, and I don't think anyone knows. Trump has successfully turned the Republican Party into a personality cult. You see it at his rallies. Republican candidates and politicians that don't pay loyalty to this Trump cult are resigning in droves or not running for re-election, or like Lindsey Graham, acting as kind of obsequious courtiers and echo chambers to the White House. I think deep down inside, they don't like him. He's a hard guy to like. But whether they'll turn, I think that is the great unknown. It's not a question I can answer.
It's just they lost an election this weekend, didn't they? And Trump gave 2 speeches, went there and gave 2 rallies. But the Trump candidate still lost.
Yes, that's true. It's not the first time, by the way. We saw in other special elections that the Trump-endorsed candidate lost. But I think the Democratic Party strategy is very risky because what they did for 2 years is blame the election of Trump on Russia. Well, that didn't work. Now they're trying to impeach Trump over quote unquote bribery. But no one except for Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, who the Democratic Party donor class have decided neither of whom are going to get the nomination. In fact, there have been several articles in the New York Times about the donor class plotting to, if Biden is weak, bring in maybe Michael Bloomberg. Hillary Clinton is now talking about running again. And so they just will not address the social inequality, which the Democratic Party, especially under the Clintons, orchestrated, that I think is the main driving factor towards the very legitimate rage on the part of especially the white working class, which saw Trump get elected, and the utter refusal on the part of the Democratic Party leadership to address this reality and attempt to demonize, possibly impeach Trump. I think it's a very risky strategy, and I think it may not work, especially if they cough up a lackluster, hack like Joe Biden, who has had his fingers in every disaster that the United States empire has orchestrated, starting with the wars in Iraq, the whole system of mass incarceration, the explosion of mass incarceration in this country, the militarization of police, the trade agreements, the NAFTA, all the betrayals of the working class. Biden was front and center for all of that. And I just think the Democratic Party and its donor base are really, really out of touch, as we saw in 2016, and they remain out of touch. And so this is their election strategy, but it's not guaranteed to work.
Can that really be serious that Hillary Clinton is thinking of entering the race at this 11th hour?
Well, Hillary Clinton said yesterday she's under, I'm using her words, quote, enormous pressure. Look, these people, the Clintons, are pathological addicts of power and have been for decades. Yes, I think it is serious. I think it's a serious possibility.
Wow.
Yeah, I know. Well, that's just they are.
Yeah, exactly. Let me turn, if I may, to something that matters a lot to both of us. The events that unfolded in the week in Bolivia. The United States liberal class, how are they taking the overthrow of the only indigenous leader in the continent, the president much beloved by people around the world? Are they jumping ship from Bolivia as they did previously on the Venezuela issue?
Yeah, we go back to 2009 with Honduras. I mean, there have been a series of reversals throughout Latin America, Bolivia being one of the last holdouts. It's great that he's indigenous, but he's also a left-wing and a socialist, and the corporate entities and the empire have had it out for him for a long time. So there isn't much outcry, unfortunately. And what's happened to Evo Morales fits a kind of pattern. Now, whether it's Ecuador, whether it's Venezuela, Argentina, on and on and on, we have seen a rolling back of progressive governments within the region. And this has been especially egregious in Central America, where it's handed over to these militarized narco cartels that have turned countries like El Salvador, Guatemala, which are major trafficking countries for drugs, into the United States, into, and especially Honduras, into just killing capitals. That's why you have 1,000 people a day fleeing the violence, which is, these are some of the highest homicide rates in the world. And this is directly attributable to the interference of the empire in overthrowing governments that were socialist or socialist leaning.
It's all gone quiet on the Iranian front. I flew down the middle of the Straits of Hormuz yesterday, and only a few weeks ago I'd have been afraid of being shot out of the sky. Why has it gone quiet on the Iranian front?
Because the U.S. military does not want a war with Iran.
Okay.
Unequivocal. And Iran has made it very clear that there are numerous military installations throughout the Middle East that will be obliterated if there is a war. And I think that has put the brakes on it. You have Hawks, Bolton, although he's left the White House, Pompeo, of course, the Israel lobby, they all want it. But the Pentagon has been adamant, because I think they've got their hands full as it is with all the other failed states they've created around Iran.
Now, he's coming here, Chris, overpaid, oversexed, and over here. Donald Trump's coming here in the last few days of the British general election. What could possibly go wrong?
Well, I'm sure he will be free with his advice. Well, if I were the Corbyn campaign, I'd probably roll out the red carpet. I can't imagine how you see Boris Johnson's kind of keeping him at arm's length. He's kind of a hand grenade, a human hand grenade. Let's hope he does his best to get Jeremy Corbyn and Labour in power.
Chris Hedges, thank you very much indeed for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. Chris Hedges, what a man. Now, do you believe Prince Andrew's account of events? Yes, 4%. No, 96%. Hasn't worked out well for you, Andy. Andy, as you're known. Let's take a break.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
By Any Means Necessary is your guide to the movement and efforts shaping the world around us, from mass incarceration.
No longer am I interested in or concerned with prison reform. I am interested only in the eradication of prisons.
to the battle between police and water protectors.
It was a pretty punishing disregard for the sanctity of human life that unleashing water cannons on peaceful, prayerful water protectors.
From efforts to protect the environment,
The climate movement is ready to, with plenty of opposition research and force and strength, along with, the right of both science and morality to fight them on this.
to the movement for Black Lives.
When I first saw the Michael Brown video and I saw that it clearly contradicted the narrative put forth by the Ferguson Police Department and by police supporters in general, 3 words came to mind: color me shocked.
Stay tuned to By Any Means Necessary, 5 days a week here on Radio Sputnik. Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com.
George Galloway and the mother of all talk shows. Join us at the College of Knowledge, where there are no tuition fees.
We are talking.
24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
You are listening.
We give you the most essential out of the endless information space.
Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
The mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. Only on Sputnik Radio.
Now, I need your point of view. Of course, you can tweet me at George Galloway at RTUK News. You can call the British or American numbers. We've got some of that NHS film I just referred to. Chris, are we in a position to watch a... Yeah, let's have a quick look at that. I'm interested in that.
Our National Health Service, one of Britain's proudest achievements. Lifting burden from the sick, copied across the world and celebrated in our Olympic ceremony. A complicit media, having failed to hold power to account, now busily report NHS failures after years of financial squeeze. Consecutive governments have secretly prepared it for corporate takeover. After years of erosion, the NHS, its budget and very fabric up for grabs. There will be no share offering, no adverts on the side of a bus. This is a robbery for its new corporate masters in the great NHS heist.
The big American health corporations and American health insurers and the American drug companies are absolutely, they're salivating.
These companies are in the business to make money.
Giant corporations, they get caught in fraud and they pay the ticket and keep on speeding.
They're always vigilant to try to avoid paying for care in one way or another.
They were literally kidnapping psychiatric patients and holding them against their will until the day their insurance ran out.
Here in the United States, you might as well be on the moon for the opportunity that you would have to get the care that you need.
No one should ever copy the system.
It is in the sights and the target of the multinational corporations.
So remember, you'll get a discount, 20% discount, if you go to movie.thegreatnhsheist.com before the 30th of November and use the discount code MOATS, M-O-A-T-S. There's some utterly hilarious material now coming in on the Prince Andrew thing. The Vanguardian says, I know this is true because I was in. I know this is true because I was in Woking Pizza Express, March 10th, 2001. Everyone was gulping down their extra spicy pepperoni pizzas. And as I looked over my shoulder, there sat a man, the only man failing to sweat out the chili. Truly, he was a prince among men. And Steve says, people believing Prince Andrew are seriously gullible. Les Typing says, I think Prince Andrew saw the last of the old days where once you hit a certain level of society, you could do whatever you wanted and get away with it. Jane A., great friend of the show, says, I had to rub my eyes as I watched it, as I believed they were playing tricks. And Michael East says, Only 7% say yes on your poll. All right, who shared the poll around Buckingham Palace? I don't think there'd be many people in Buckingham Palace voting for Andrew. It's still 95 to 5 with 1,777 votes in so far. I'm joined by the wonderful Alena. How's the social media buzzing tonight?
Yeah, it's so busy. We've got so many platforms now, so I'm really struggling to keep up with it at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, you need one on each, yeah.
Yeah. Well, there's loads of comments on Prince Andrew.
Yeah. What do you think's the consensus? Is there much support for Andrew amongst our audience?
Yeah. Well, I don't think people believe him very much at this moment, but let's hope.
You had a story like that to sell that it must have been obvious not many people would believe. What would be the point? Because there's no crime under British law involved here, so it's not like the British police were going to charge him. The trafficking issue may well constitute a crime, although I don't think it's suggested that he trafficked this girl. It was Maxwell and Epstein that trafficked the girl. But a 17-year-old, whilst it's, of course, unseemly, it would not have been a crime for Andrew to have had sex with her. But he hasn't gone with that one. He's gone with the I've never set eyes on her before, so far as I know.
Do you think that interview was a mistake?
Totally. I mean, I've got no time for them, but even if he'd rung me up, I would have advised him not to do it. Anyway, what else is going down?
Yeah, well, people seem to really agree with you. There is one question for you. George, why do you think Prince Andrew's links to child sex trafficking should be dealt with as an internal family matter and not by the law?
Well, as I say, this one girl, I have no idea if there are others, she's 17, 16 is the age of consent here in Britain, so there would, on the face of it, not be a crime there. You could say it's morally repugnant and all of that, and of course it is, but there would not be a crime there. And therefore, it's puzzling, unless he's aware of something else coming down the track. It's puzzling that he took to trial by television. He's not even very good. He's not even very nimble on his feet. He's not the sharpest knife in the box. He's not the cleverest member of the royal family, and that's saying something. And I thought that the interviewer, Emily Maitlis, made mincemeat out of him, really. She made a chopped up pepperoni pizza of him. Anything else?
Well, I'll have to come back with more
let me know
tweets
the
and
countries,
comments.
if we've got any new countries, yeah?
Well, I think this week we only have a few new countries, which is Greece and New Zealand.
Greece and New Zealand.
So
welcome.
to add to our list.
Yeah, yeah. One day we should get, tick all the boxes, see if there are any countries that we don't yet have an audience in, and then we can go all out to find them. It would be good to have somebody watching or listening in every country in the world, wouldn't it?
Yeah, that's the aim.
Wonderful to see you back on the screen. Many, many of your fans will be glad to see you. Let me read some of the others. Yes, of course I believe Prince Andrew, says Richard. I'm just off to check on the little folks at the bottom of my garden. He comes across as such a humble and unassuming guy. And Oren says, people press yes on your poll were those who laughed so hard they clicked the wrong bar. And Alan says the interview was a whitewash, a public spin exercise, damage control. And AJ says, I was lying on the bed and she fell on top of me. And Jesper says it was almost impossible to get through the interview. It didn't take many minutes before I was saying to myself, there's something wrong here. And Celia Moore, hashtag free Julian Assange, says, I only believe the bit when he said that he never bought his own drinks, as Craig Murray so promptly stated. Did he really say that? He really admit that he doesn't pay for his own drinks? Anyway, they're terrific. All of them are terrific. Now, earlier, I spoke to RT. I do these weekly shorts. And this week, it was about the departing Speaker of the House of Commons, who I'm fully expecting to turn up in the jungle. Take a look at this. It may be on I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of This Jungle, or it may be on Dancing on Ice, Strictly Come Dancing. Who knows? But you haven't seen the last of the Speaker of the House of Commons, John Bercow, as his celebrity interview in GQ with the blood-soaked war criminal Alistair Campbell makes obvious. Of course, even a stopped clock is right twice a day, and in this celebrity interview with Alistair Campbell, Tony Blair's former spin doctor, John Bercow got two things absolutely right. He slammed David Cameron as possibly the worst of recent prime ministers, who's put Britain in a very difficult situation for party management purposes. That's true. He denounced David Cameron for his presumption that he was born to rule, and he's surely right about that. And he also was unequivocal that Jeremy Corbyn ain't no anti-Semite bruv. And it's right that he said that. Mr. Bercow is himself Jewish. He made it clear he has never seen, felt, heard a scintilla of anti-Semitism from the Labour side, from the Corbyn side. He implied, therefore, that he may have experienced it elsewhere, and I know what he's talking about on that. I sat under 4 speakers in the British Parliament across nearly 30 years, and of the 4, John Bercow was overwhelmingly the worst. And after I left, well, he just got worse and worse. And the reason is that to be the Speaker of the House of Commons, you must be, and you must be seen to be, absolutely impartial between both sides of the House and between individual members of Parliament. And you have to surmount your own political philosophy. Now, John Bercow's political philosophy has been an ever-moving feast. Over decades, he metamorphosed from a former secretary of the Monday Club, the hard right anti-immigration, frankly borderline racist conservative organisation, all the way to being just about the most achingly liberal member of the House of Commons. And his bias, his partiality, followed him across that journey. Now, that didn't matter all that much until it came to Brexit. For a moment, John Bercow ran the country. He was able, from the pivot of the Speaker's chair, to decide whether we went forwards or backwards, leftwards or rightwards, and nobody could do a thing about it. Because, of course, the House of Commons didn't have a majority for anything, let alone removing the Speaker and electing a new one. And he seized that power, a Bonapartist seizure of power to wreck Brexit. Well, at least that's what he hoped and thought. In the end, it was all to no avail. The British general election, which had to come, has come, and we'll see what happens at the end of it. But John Bercow, in the process, made himself something of a little celebrity. He intends to make the most of that. It probably won't be in the House of Commons. It will almost certainly be in the House of Lords, because the Speaker of Parliament more or less automatically becomes a member of the peerage. But that will not be enough for little Bercow. Maybe it'll be the European Union, where he's something of a hero. Maybe it's the United States of America, who've paid attention to him in a way they never did for any speaker before. One way or another, though, Speaker John Bercow hasn't gone away, you know. Unfortunately, from my point of view.
Have something to say? Do you disagree with George? Then call us now and give us your view.
There's still a solid 5% of you believe Prince Andrew's story. Now, as I said earlier, even if he'd rung me, I would have advised Andrew not to do that interview. Now, I'm joined by our editor and a man who could scarcely be more experienced in media, a man who's been on virtually every publication in Fleet Street, been on television and radio all over the country, indeed in much of the world. Ron Mackay. Ron, welcome. I just wanted to ask you, what thought process would have gone into making the decision to be interviewed by Emily Maitlis last night?
Clearly not a lot of thought went into it, because it was...
Do you think that's right? Do you think,
well,
it was lightly taken?
No, I think it was his arrogance. He overruled his media advisor, who has resigned as a result of it. So it's, you know, it's, I think, symptomatic of Andrew, what we know about him, that he's arrogant, bullheaded, and clearly thought that he could carry it off rather than be carried out.
What were the key failures in his performance last night?
Well, he looked entirely shifty, did he not?
Yeah.
I mean, apart from what he said, if he didn't sweat...
he was definitely sweating last night.
Yeah, he definitely was sweating.
His adrenaline imbalances come back into to normal.
I mean, as a journalist, I mean, wearing two hats here, may have to borrow one of yours, George. As a journalist, it's manna, isn't it? It's just wonderful what he did. But as his media advisor, you must say, why did you do that? Why did you ignore me? Why did you make such an awful burach of it, to use a Highland word? It was a complete catastrophe.
What do you think the consequences will be? I mean, and up to a point, he's got diplomatic immunity and so on. He's not going to face any consequences. So maybe he genuinely doesn't care what the public think about it.
Well, I mean, he has said, has he not, that he's willing to testify in the States if it comes to it.
Has he?
He has said that, yeah.
Because he's not obliged to, because he does have diplomatic immunity.
Yeah, but he's volunteered it. He's comprehensively denied it. Says he was.
The girl, yeah. But he has admitted the unwisdom of going to stay. You may say, how could he do otherwise? Going to stay in Epstein's mansion after Epstein was convicted of being a paedophile.
Yeah. As he put it, it was convenient.
It's a nice, convenient place to stay.
Yeah. Without any security, one presumes, just with his pal, Jeffrey.
Yeah. That's suspicious, isn't it?
Totally, completely.
Because he must have a protection officer.
Of course he does, at least one, as we know. So, yeah, there was no protection there. He was flying by himself, presumably. It's just, the shocking bit about it is that he's not offered any kind of sympathy, any kind of apology to all of the women that Epstein trafficked, abused, took advantage of.
He could certainly have done that, should have done that. He would say, presumably, well, Epstein was the criminal here, not me. I just found his place convenient to stay, even though he had a criminal conviction. I've let the Queen down. I mean, he didn't even say that particularly persuasively. He didn't look like a man who really believed that he thought he'd done something wrong, did he?
I don't think Andrew does, sorry, not convincingly. No, he was completely wooden, false about it, put on the spot. It just was, I go back to the car crash analogy, it was worse than that. It was a kind of media nuclear explosion involving Andrew.
Quite a scoop for the BBC Newsnight. They don't get that many.
He obviously thought he was going to get a soft deal out of Newsnight, when it turned out not to be the case. Although the questioning wasn't all that hostile. He was just an easy target, wasn't he? The obvious questions asked.
Yeah. Ghislaine Maxwell, his university friend, Epstein's right-hand woman.
Yep.
Robert Maxwell, who stole your pension too.
Did, yeah.
Daughter. How can they get away with not looking for her. How come there's not a single police force in the whole world looking for Ghislaine Maxwell, even though she is on the receiving end of allegations of extremely serious nature of sexual crime?
Well, that's simply incomprehensible. They must know. Someone must know where she is. The police must know where she is. She was photographed, was she not, in a restaurant in LA?
Yeah, though that may have been a fake.
Yeah.
But Andrew said he saw her just a few months ago. Yeah. I mean, before the events, the suicide and so on. Do you think we'll ever know what happened to Epstein in the jail? I mean, will truth out on that? One likes to think, in America more than here actually, that truth does come out because they've got more media protection for free speech and so on than we do. Do you think we'll ever know?
Well, I'm a bit of a cynic on the conspiracy theories. It may well be that he did kill himself.
Oh yeah, I think that's most likely that he did kill himself, but
he was allowed
to kill himself. Seems to me
he was given license.
Yeah, I mean that seems incontestable to me.
Given license, if not the rope.
Enough rope to hang himself. So what happens next? Does Andrew just carry on regardless? What role has he got now in public life?
Well, it seems to be that today he's kind of doubled down on it by saying he thought he was right to give the interview. He seems to be the only person who thinks that's the case. A testimony again to his arrogance. What happens is, presumably all of the charities that he's involved with are going to
dump him.
Please, stay away for a while and see how it goes.
Mind you, he still has the loyal support of Fergie, Duchess Fergie, the Duchess as he referred to her last night.
Yeah, I think it was her support not before the interview, rather than afterwards.
Yeah, she said he was a giant of a man.
Yeah, that's why they divorced, presumably.
The polls on the screen, look, it's not changing. 95% say they don't believe Andrew's account. 5% say they do. But that 5% is, it's 100 people. So there's 100 people watching and listening to this. Do believe Prince Andrew. No accounting for taste.
Well, maybe this is the way that some Brits regard the royal family. They can't do no wrong. They're venerable.
Do you think, just in conclusion, do you think it's all been very damaging for the royals?
Yes, yet again. There's a cycle to these things, isn't there? Where they go public, Diana case, and it all atomizes, and it's done it again. He can only have done it and apparently persuaded the Queen against the advice of the people who counted, the media advisors. And everyone who's ever dealt with him subsequently, giving him advice, says, why did he do it? It was the car crash.
Well, tell me what you think. Get your votes in. Let me have your calls and tweets. I apologise to those around the world for whom this story has little interest, but you have to know that the British remain very interested in the royal family, at least most of them. I'll be back shortly after the news with the second hour of the mother of all talk shows.
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
This is Dominic Carter, a political reporter in New York for Verizon Fios TV News.
This is Dr. Bill Honigman of Progressive Democrats of America, PDAmerica.org.
Hey, everybody, my name is Tim Black of The Tim Black Show.
This is Tom Luongo of Gold Coast and Guns. Hello, this is Benny Johnson.
Hi, this is Juanita Broderick, author of You'd Better Put Some Ice on That.
This is Jamal Thomas from the Progressive Soapbox.
Hey, this is Raheem from D.C.
This is Rachel Blevins, a correspondent with RT America, and you're listening to Fault Lines with Nixon and Stranahan.
When I'm waking up in the morning, I'm looking for what's on the queue for the day. I tune to Fault Lines with Nixon and Stranahan.
the wokest radio show for your wokest AM.
These guys are the best in the business and experts when it comes to policy.
They're bringing you the top headlines with an angle that you won't see in the mainstream media.
Fault Lines is the greatest show on the radio. I enjoy immensely talking with Lee and Garland. They always treat me from either side with due respect, and it's a wonderful conversation.
The best morning news show in America. Fault Lines with Nixon and Stranahan.
Lee and Garland speak truth to power from the depths of the swamp itself, right here on Radio Sputnik.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com.
Radio Sputnik News.
A television interview with Britain's Prince Andrew over his involvement with the U.S. sex offender Jeremy Epstein has been savaged by media pundits and a former advisor to the royal family. The hour-long interview, which aired on BBC last night, was an attempt by the prince to clear his name over allegations that he had sex with a 17-year-old girl, Virginia Roberts, who is allegedly Epstein's sex trafficking victim. Andrew denied the claim when it was put to him. He said that on the night he had been alleged to have slept with Roberts, he was actually at a Pizza Express restaurant with his 2 children. Andrew visited Epstein at his mansion in New York in 2010, shortly after Epstein had been released from prison for sex offenses. At one point in the interview, the prince described Epstein's crimes as unbecoming. The prince's decision to speak so candidly about his relationship with Epstein, who died in prison after he was charged with sex trafficking, and answer allegations about sex with Roberts was widely condemned. The former Buckingham Palace press officer, Dickie Arbiter, described the interview as excruciating. It's understood that Andrew's doctor resigned from his job 2 weeks ago after advising the prince not to go ahead with the interview. The UK government and British armed forces have been accused of covering up the killing of civilians by British troops in Afghanistan and Iraq. An investigation by the BBC's Panorama program and the Sunday Times newspaper spoke to 11 British detectives who said they found credible evidence of war crimes. Britain's Ministry of Defense rejected what it called the unsubstantiated allegation of a pattern of cover-ups. Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab said all of the allegations that had evidence have been looked at. He said the right balance had been struck over decisions whether or not to investigate alleged war crimes. The new evidence has come from inside the Iraq Historic Allegations Team, which investigated alleged war crimes committed by British troops during the occupation of Iraq, and Operation Northmore, which investigated alleged war crimes in Afghanistan. The government decided to close both down after a lawyer who had taken up more than 1,000 cases of alleged abuse, killings, and torture was struck off as a solicitor following allegations he had paid fixers in Iraq to find clients. But former detectives claim that this was used as an excuse to close down criminal investigations. The Conservative Party has said that if it is returned to power in Britain's general election next month, charges will not be brought against soldiers in the allegations are more than 10 years old, as these are. Next, police in Paris have arrested more than 100 people as protests to mark the first anniversary of the anti-government Yellow Vest movement turned violent. Yellow Vest rallies took place nationwide on Saturday, a year after they first erupted. Some of the worst violence seen in months erupted in the city. Tear gas and water cannons were used by police, where thousands of protesters thronged the streets of the French capital. France's President Emmanuel Macron and his government have been accused of ignoring the needs of ordinary citizens. The protests first erupted in November last year over fuel price rising, but grew to cover wider grievances including low wages, living costs, and economic inequality. At least 200,000 people have protested against the Czech government in the capital, Prague. Demonstrators are calling for Prime Minister Andrej Babiš to resign over allegations of fraud. It's alleged Babiš used European Union subsidies for his private business, a Czech conglomerate called Agrofert, something he denies. The protest yesterday was held on the eve of the 30th anniversary of the Velvet Revolution, which ended communist rule in what was then Czechoslovakia. The death toll in Bolivia continues to rise after violent clashes between security forces and supporters of former President Evo Morales. On Friday, security forces opened fire on supporters of Morales in Sacaba, killing at least 8 people. A doctor in the city said that most of those killed and injured had bullet wounds. It's believed a total of 19 people have died since the disputed election on October 20th. Yesterday, UN Human Rights Chief Michelle Bachelet warned that violence in Bolivia could spin out of control. Morales resigned last week over allegation of voter fraud in the general election and fled to Mexico. And finally, the U.S. businesswoman embroiled in controversy over the extent of her relationship with Boris Johnson claims that the British Prime Minister treated her like a gremlin when she asked for help on handling the media. Jennifer Curry claimed Johnson snubbed her and hung up on her when she tried to make contact with him several times. She said, "I don't understand why you've blocked me and ignored me, as if I were some fleeting one-night stand or some girl that you picked up at a bar, because I wasn't, and you know that." Well, that's Sputnik News. I'm Emily Horn.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
You're watching the mother of all talk shows, the Open University of the Airwaves, the College of Knowledge, which now has its own on-air email account. Here's the address: onair@ggmoats.com. onair@ggmoats.com. And I'm already getting a very significant number of emails on that. So you can now call us, you can tweet us, but you can also email us. We have a guest from the streets of France, a man who has been intimately involved in one whole year of struggle with the Gilets jaunes, the yellow vests, whom, as I said earlier, you'd be forgiven for not having heard of here in Britain, unless you watch RT and listen to Radio Sputnik, because I have never seen anything on any other mainstream media platform about the yellow vests. He is also our guest, responsible for the yellow vests' work on the Julian Assange case. And these two issues are not separate issues. He's Aymeric Monville, and he comes to us from France, and I'm very grateful, Aymeric, for that. Let's start with the scale of what has been 12 months, exactly, I think, is coming up. Act 53 is coming up. Every single week for an entire year. That's pretty, even by French standards. That's a big, big protest.
Yes, it's a watershed. It's completely new. I thought myself that France was gone out of story, and I think now that the French people, the revolutionary French people, is back with a vengeance. And it's true that all these Saturdays we might have the impression, like Chairman Mao said, that a revolution is like a bicycle. If it stops, it falls. But I think they will rejoin. There will be a rush of strikes in December. On December the 5th, it will be huge because it's already a renewable strike. And I think when the Yellow Vests can converge, can go the same direction with the unions, it was something that was really difficult to make this year. But I think that Macron will have to step down, and
It did happen once or twice that the CGT, for example, came out in sympathy, but there was never a dovetailing of organised labour with the Yellow Vests. No, is that because of mistakes made by the Yellow Vests or mistakes made by the labour unions?
I think we have to, it's not only a cliche, but you have to distinguish between the rank and file of the CGT and there's that direction. If a union works, there's no division, but there is still a division, because since we are talking at the beginnings of the 80s about social dialogue, we are losing everything. Since 1905, we have lost a lot of struggles in France, because these unions have strong links with the European confederations of unions, and that's an enormous problem. That's why at the beginning, the leaders of the CGT were talking bad things about the Yellow Vests. Of course, you can, when you have a strong movement, you can have some far-right activists that can try to work within this movement. But it's not representative, the Yellow Vest, because it was really an uprising of the working class. And they should have supported much before that. But there was a big congress of the CGT, which is, maybe all the British don't know that it's the most fighting union in France. It has a strong link with the Communist Party when the Communist Party wanted to be communist, but it changed. But, and they are capable to organize a general, renewable, interprofessional strike. But if you go to this field with a struggle with the capital and labor, it will help the Yellow Vest. It will help this movement, because when they started to block the old refineries, the roundabouts, there was a struggle. Just making little demonstrations every Saturdays, it's a show of force. It's very important. It's very important to create a consciousness, a political consciousness. But you have to have a showdown with Macron, with the power.
Now, let's talk about the ontology of the Yellow Vests, because if you tax someone here for their total disinterest in the Yellow Vest, they will say, well, they're fascists, they're homophobes, they are misogynists, they are the kind of, in England, the English Defence League, the Tommy Robinson types. No, is that true? To what extent is that true?
Oh, no, I think you must say that the French people hate fascism, because fascism for us French is a product from abroad. It was, even in the 30s, we had the Popular Front. Fascism came with the war. So you can have a far-right movement very strong. Or the far-right...
Well, Marine Le Pen is very strong.
Yes, but she has to mince her words in respect with other parties. She has to adapt to a very Republican state of mind of the French. When they have this tricolor flag, it means the unity of the Republican state. It means equality for all. That's very typically French. They hate this divergence, these inequalities. They compare Macron with absolute monarchy.
He is seen as a new Bourbon.
Yes, exactly. The difference with Britain is that we have an absolute monarchy, because we have the Fifth Republic, which is a very Bonapartist-style republic. He has a parliament which is elected after the presidential election, and they always rubber stamp everything that the president is making. And he was elected by a whisker at the first round with a lot of candidates, and he won everything. At the second round, there was a far-right candidate, so the majority of the French didn't want it and voted for him, but not on this program. And they were it was a lot of avant-garde, because he didn't realize it. He didn't make any concessions to this kind of thing. He applied this program, and that was I would describe it as an American-style new feudal dystopia. And no one in France wants this destruction of our state, of the social services, because the French have it's an old nation which created a big state which protected the citizens. They want to have a state which protects us, but not a king like that, very arrogant, very cynical.
So has it taken a significant toll on Macron's popularity, the Yellow Vests, every week after week?
Yes, he cannot apply his program. The problem with Macron is it's not only because he's arrogant, because he launched another campaign against the pensions, and in December it would be this rash of strikes against him. It's not only a strategical fault because he risks a lot on this case, but it's because the European Union imposes this kind of reforms. It's a European straitjacket. It's the yellow jacket against this straitjacket, the European straitjacket. And I think the only way the yellow vests must understand, they must realize that all the reivindications, all what their demands cannot be applied within the framework of the European Union. And Macron is compelled to abide by the European laws.
So is Frexit, French exit from the EU, on the agenda now?
Oh yes, I think this is the only solution. And exit EU, exit Euro, exit NATO, and exit capitalism, of course, because all is linked together. Because Macron cannot. He made little concessions in last December. But with the currency, you know, after 68, you could give something and take it anew with the inflation. But you cannot play with the currency because that's a EU, that's a euro. And it was designed, there's a neoliberal in France, it's rare, but he spilled the bean. He said Europe is designed to avoid socialism in France because France is a revolutionary country. But the problem is because of these people who defend Europe, they don't have their hands free. They must obey, they're unable to make concessions. And because they are unable to make concessions, they will fail because the people's anger is very high. And I must say there's a lot of despair. Last week there was a student, he set fire on himself.
I saw that, yeah.
It's like we were South Korea. It's completely unusual in our political traditions. You can see some in the schools. You have that. You have some in the hospitals. A lot of despair, but despair, and anger, and unconsciousness. And
is there an alternative to Macron, though? I see none. I see no presidential candidate that can defeat him.
It's true that we have to renew a new republic because not very much more horizontal democracy with a reverse referendum or people's initiative. That's one of the strong demand of the Yellow Vest. We must have a more parliamentary democracy, and which goes from bottom to the top. And they're discussing a lot about it. It's 1 year of political awareness.
Yeah, I mean, it's a university, to be sure. Now, they have not, the Yellow Vests, overlooked other issues that are not directly related, but indirectly are very much related. And one of those is the Julian Assange case. Tell us how that is seen from France.
Yes, I wrote a book myself because I'm part of this Yellow Vest group who's very interested in the Assange case. But I must say that I don't want to lecture the British about that because we have political prisoners in France too. But it's true that for the Assange case, it's a journalist too. That's very, very serious issue. And I will be tomorrow at Westminster's Magistrates Court. A lot of French, with the Yellow Vest French, go there because we want to know. For me, there's 3 scandals. There's the scandals that the people whose crime he denounced, he unmasked, are not in prison, but he must suffer for them. There's this, and within it, there is a scandal of the silence of the media, and third scandal, that's a lack of defense. And we saw even their lawyers. There's a very good article in English. It was Lucy Commissar. She's an American journalist, and she said that there is a conflict of interest not only with the judge Arbuthnot. We all know that. I think in England that her husband is working with MI5 or MI6 ex-director, but with the lawyers. There are some lawyers who, the Doughty Street Chambers, the Matrix Chambers, they are working in the broader Magnitsky story. and from the side of the United States. And you know this broader Magnitsky story, I would call it a hoax, because it's a Cold War propaganda machine against Russia for imperialism. And people who think they can defend Assange are working in the same chamber with people who defend the USSR, the interest of the American imperialism. And that's a problem, and that explains maybe why they didn't lodge complaint of torture, because we all know that there was a very good article of Craig Murray about him being tortured. But I think it was a relief for me to read this article, because in English we know things now. But he said, I was skeptical with the UN reporter about a reporter on torture, but okay, the UN sent sent a report in the prison since 2016. The UN said that he must be freed. He's innocent. He must be freed. And it's time the British must recognize it, because now we can say, who's next?
Yes, who's next? Indeed. Aymeric, thank you very much. Let me see your book. Is it on sale now?
Yes, in France. It's
Julian Assange, En danger de mort. Well, I'm afraid that is the long and the short of it. I hope everyone has a good look at that.
Julian's in mortal danger.
He is in mortal danger. Thank you indeed, very much indeed, for joining us. So Ask Adam is coming up in the last hour. If you have questions to put to Adam, please #AskAdam. Get them into me now. Emails. Great show. Quick question. What will happen if the possible election fraud allegations against the Tory party regarding the Brexit party hold substance? Could the election be put on hold or even cancelled? And have we any previous precedents? This is from POB St. Helens. This is the extraordinary story that a number of Brexit party leaders allege that they were offered top jobs by the Conservatives if they stepped down in the Conservative interest in the election. Another from Paul Booker in Somerset. So, His Royal Dryness, I like that, Paul. His Royal Dryness, Prince Andrew, denies that the photo was genuine. And the evidence is that the photo, which is in fact a photo within a photo, was taken upstairs at Maxwell's house. And he has never been upstairs there. If that were the case, how does he know that the photo was taken upstairs? He's never been up there. More holes in Andrew's story than a Swiss cheese. And Happy says, I had him down as more of a Greggs man myself than a pizza man. Krista Roth says, quote, he was breathing heavily. Well, you see, that's very peculiar because I have a medical condition, or rather I had one then, which meant that at the time I was medically incapable of breathing. I have a royal doctor who's prepared a backdated record saying so. Let's look at the poll, 95.5. I'm not getting any calls. I think there's a problem with the lines. Back up now, so give me a call. And do I have a caller on the line? Call. There's been a problem, but it's now working. Jefferson Free Press says Andrew has frequent flyer miles on Epstein's jet, but we're supposed to buy this story. And JW says, replying to Galloway Moats, possibly the worst attempt at lying in the history of lying, very reminiscent of Bill Clinton's infamous line about Monica Lewinsky. I did not have sexual relations with that woman. Much more where that came from, but let me take a quick break.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
By Any Means Necessary is your guide to the movement and efforts shaping the world around us, from mass incarceration.
No longer am I interested in or concerned with prison reform.
I am interested only in the eradication of prisons.
To the battle between police and water protectors.
It was a pretty punishing disregard for the sanctity of human life, that unleashing water cannons on peaceful, prayerful water protectors.
From efforts to protect the environment.
The climate movement is ready to, with plenty of opposition research and force and strength, along with, the right of both science and morality to fight them on this.
To the movement for Black Lives.
When I first saw the Michael Brown video, and I saw that it clearly contradicted the narrative put forth by the Ferguson Police Department and by police supporters in general, 3 words came to mind. Color me shocked.
Stay tuned to By Any Means Necessary, 5 days a week here on Radio Sputnik. Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com.
George Galloway and the mother of all talk shows. Join us at the College of Knowledge, where there are no tuition fees.
We are talking
24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
You are listening.
We give you the most essential out of the endless information space.
Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
The mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. Only on Sputnik Radio.
Remarkable outpouring of feeling on all kinds of issues coming my way now. Mr. Gossamel says, I wonder what flavor pizza Andrew got. DJ Doolittle says, eradicate the royalty. That's a bit extreme. Didn't the French do that? Anthony says, Prince Andrew should go to jail. And Salim Duran says, I hope you're keeping well and in good health after the long journey from Pakistan. No, I'm not feeling that great, but I did fly all the way to Pakistan and back in a weekend and give a speech and dozens of interviews. So I suppose I was asking for trouble, but thanks for asking. I'll be all right in the morning. Now, the emails is going well, so it's on air at ggmoats.com. George, the only question I have is, how have these privileged inbreeds been allowed to rule over us for so long? Yet another royal found closely associating with a child trafficking paedophile. The irony of this interview being broadcast 24 hours after Children in Need wasn't lost on me. Andrew, the previous royal head of the NSPCC, doesn't remember meeting children for sex, nor regret his friendship with Epstein due to learning from so many of Epstein's business and political contacts. Well, let's not ask what learning that was. My own young children have told more convincing lies. What a dreadful state of affairs. Time to be rid of the arrogant royals. Great show as ever. Regards, Helen. Thank you, Helen. Sure, Andrew knows something bad about to happen. The Crown has a whole apparatus spying on us, and they know that Epstein was a high-level asset, netting people, entrapping people. The police didn't investigate because they were told not to. And this is all from Andy McNabb, I think. It's remarkable how people imagine that they know things. The police didn't investigate because they were told not to. What is a concern is the ABC management are now in the business of protecting paedophiles, killing the story 3 years ago that had very compelling evidence. Who is going to be charged at the ABC for withholding evidence of a serious crime? It is indeed extremely serious that ABC were forced to sit on that story for 3 whole years. And the political pressure that came to bear on them not to blow the whistle, blow the gaff on the whole Epstein affair was very sinister indeed. And of course, the Clinton family were heavily involved in that. Michael says, how come you tend to stay silent on the Islamification of the West? Not to be critical, but perhaps you've spoken about it. But it's a present issue, in my opinion. I don't want a mosque on my road. Ta. Well, Michael, why don't you call me? Here's the number, 02077 982 255. That's the number to call, and we'll discuss the Islamification of the West. What balderdash is this? There are 66 million people in Britain. 2 million of them are Muslims. In what sense is there an Islamification of Britain going on? You don't want a mosque on your road? Why not? I mean, that's actually a legitimate question. Why not? What's wrong with a religious building where people go to pray being on your road? Chris says the silence in the media is deafening. If there was no D-notice, then do the media moguls regularly meet to decide what we should all know? I don't know what's more of a scary thought. And Eve says it's fine to report on events in Hong Kong and Bolivia. What is it with Paris and Catalonia? And Labour left footer says Bolivia's white 5% now holds every position in a regime that has granted immunity to police and armed forces. There has not been a cause more central to the anti-racist struggle since the fight against apartheid. And lots more, actually, where that was. Adam will be joining me shortly. So if you've got any questions you want to put to him, then send to #AskAdam. I want to do the On This Day now, if I can find it, because people have taken the trouble to dig it out. And I quite like doing On This Day because it's remarkable how little ever changes. I can't quite put my hand on it here at the moment. Maybe someone will get that for me. Let's take a 1-minute break while I find it.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com.
Tune in every Thursday to Loud and Clear with Brian Becker for the regular segment called Veterans for Peace, where we focus on the contemporary issues of war and peace that affect veterans, their families, the country, and the world as a whole. Veterans for Peace President Jerry Condon joins the show every Thursday. Hear about this and more every Thursday right here on Radio Sputnik.
We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
The mother of all talk shows, with George Galloway. The world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
It was on this day in 1989 that riot police arrested hundreds of people taking part in the biggest show of public dissent in then Czechoslovakia for 20 years, the start of what became known as the Velvet Revolution. Throughout November, peaceful mass demonstrations and strikes gained momentum. Eventually, the Communist Party resigned, and in December 1989 was replaced by a government composed mainly of non-communists. In 1993, the country split peacefully into two nations, the Czech Republic and Slovakia. Today, in 1997, 68 people were killed in an attack on a group of foreign tourists visiting a temple in southern Egypt. The tourist bus was fired on as they visited the temple. If that's how you say it, it's Hatshepsut, one of the main attractions in the town of Luxor. 6 gunmen, part of a group affiliated to Al-Qaeda, were killed in an ensuing 2-hour gun battle with police. The symbolic attack came as 65 alleged members of the Islamist group went on trial in Cairo, accused of conspiracy to murder. The attack also decimated the Egyptian tourist industry, which hasn't fully recovered to this day. Spinning back a few years, on this day in 1977, well, a few days onwards, November 19th, the Egyptian leader Anwar Sadat became the first Arab leader to visit Israel. He was greeted by Israel's Prime Minister Menachem Begin. The visit led to the Camp David Agreement in 1979. However, Sadat was isolated and snubbed in the Arab world, and in October 1981, he was assassinated by his own soldiers at a military parade in Cairo. And going even further back, this was the week in 1945 that the trial of 20 Nazi war criminals started at Nuremberg. They included Hermann Göring, Albert Speer, and Admiral Karl Dönitz, who became German president after Hitler's death. 11 of them were subsequently hanged. Others were given life sentences, whilst Göring committed suicide on the day before his execution by swallowing a cyanide pill. Good riddance to the lot of them. That's what I say. Have I got a call? One coming up. Emails here. Robert Chalmers says, the Gilets jaunes I'm still in touch with are bewildered by the scarcity and, when it is there, the tone of coverage of police actions over the last year. They keep asking me why, and I have to tell them I can guess, but I don't know. Let's talk to Mike in South Carolina. Go ahead, Mike.
Hi, George. Good to talk to you again. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fine. Good to hear from you. Go on.
Okay. I wanted to talk to you about the Trump impeachment, follow up on your interview with Chris Hedges, who I have an immense amount of respect for. I think he's the best journalist operating now.
Yeah, me too.
States.
Yeah.
So, basically, he didn't want to commit to what would happen in the Senate. And I can tell you what's going to happen in both the House and the Senate when this goes forward. By the way, Lindsey Graham, who he talked about, is my senator from this state. Okay.
You have my sympathies.
Yes, I understand. But what's happening right now? Okay, it took a long time to get here for this actual impeachment inquiry in the House, and what's basically happening here is that they're bringing out all the evidence and showing it to the people in public, so that they can see what actually he has done. And the Republicans are only doing obfuscation, trying to confuse the issue when they have their chances to actually interview the witnesses. But there's no doubt, what Trump has done is illegal. And the Republicans themselves, they cannot afford to lose Trump. They can't, because right now, all of their base, and they only have about 30%, and they are all Trump supporters. And so if they were to actually butt Trump, go against him, they would lose all support for all of their other candidates when they run in this
So you think
election.
they'll hang on to him for fear of something worse?
Well, they absolutely will, because, Pence will replace him. He does represent, as Chris said, the religious right. But that's not what they need right now. What they need is all of those Trump supporters to go out to vote, or else they're done. As you know, in the midterm elections, they lost badly. They lost the House. That's what led to this impeachment inquiry. Yeah. Now, the House may or may not vote to actually impeach the president, which means that it goes to trial in the Senate. If you remember back when
Nixon,
Bill Clinton had his troubles.
And Clinton,
you remember that big trial in the Senate. Well, they may not vote for that, because I think their main intention is to get all of this information out in front of the public. But if they do vote for impeachment after these hearings are done, it will go to the Senate for trial, in which the Republicans control the entire process. And what will happen there is you will not see not a single Republican senator vote for his removal. So consequently, since it takes 2/3 vote,
it can't happen. Then it can't happen. But it will dominate the presidential election campaign, won't it?
It will. But the thing to remember is that the Republicans will be running that trial in the Senate, as the Democrats are running the impeachment hearings in the House.
Yeah.
So you will get a whole different perspective, and absolutely they will bring out the corrupt Joe Biden and all of this stuff and his son.
Do you think? Do you think, Mike, that the American people give much of a toss about the Ukraine gate?
I don't think it's people are talking about it openly with each other. Of course, that's true about most of the government stuff that happens here. Okay.
Yeah.
Much less, in your country. But
okay.
What will happen is through these public hearings and all of this television coverage, which is happening live. The American people will be exposed.
Are people watching? I mean, what are the ratings like?
Yes, the people are watching. In fact, it's on regular over-the-air TV, not to mention all of the cable channels that you can get it on.
Yeah.
But yes, it's going to have an effect. And but the Republicans are desperate now. They know that if they lose any of their support for Trump, that they are totally done. The party's done.
They're steeped in blood so far. It's difficult to know whether it's best to go on or. Thank you very much, Mike, in South Carolina. Emails. George, Sir Galloway, glad to have a way to reach out since I don't use Twitter anymore. Just wanted to say how much I love you and the show. Always fighting the good fight and speaking out for those that have no voice. That's why I admire you. Thank you very much indeed. Hork Lavine QC, which stands for quite controversial, says an interview with President Assad on Moats would be a scoop. In fact, that scoop has already been landed by my colleague and friend Afsan Ratansi on Going Underground on RT. Chisoro Tendai. George, what's your take on the recent situation in Gaza? Where do you think things will go from here for the Palestinians and Israelis? Going nowhere fast, going in the same way that they have for the last 70 years. I see no prospect of an Israel-Palestine settlement at all. Carl says, I was actually in Pizza Express the night Andrew was in. I had a picture taken with him, stood next to Elvis, Shergar, and Lord Lucan. And Dave says, ironic you need the internet to get universal credit, but it's not a necessity to the Tories. And Tina Buckley said, I'm sorry, I can't get through to Moats, so I wanted to speak with you. Reference Corbyn's new free internet policy. Let's talk about that for a minute. The people, the Tories, regarded it as communist. What was the phrase they used? A kind of madness, anyway. The idea that we should nationalize broadband and give it to people, every person in the country, for free. Now, a communist crackpot, that's what it was. Now, being neither a communist nor a crackpot myself, I wondered why I felt that actually this was a very good idea. Why should broadband be owned by private companies? Why should Richard Branson or Mark Zuckerberg or any of the other plutocrats that are running these mega corporations in the media, internet-based companies, why should they own the airwaves? The country, the state, the people should own these airwaves. I really don't get why people are upset about it. Then I began to get, once I said this, a bit of a backlash. People saying, well, we don't trust the state to control our access to the internet. But of course, the state already does. They can tell Richard Branson anytime to cut you off, and Richard Branson will cut you off. The idea that the private corporations are more of a guarantor of internet freedom than the elected government of the day in Britain would be is, I think, fanciful. But let me know what you think. Just after I deal with the situation in Venezuela, because we have a special guest on the show by Skype, Alejandra Cazaz, activist and internationalist on Bolivia, who should be on the line now. Alejandra? Hello?
Hello?
Yes.
Hello?
It's just audio.
You can hear me?
Yeah, we don't have your picture up because it's quite tricky for you. Tell us, please, what's happening now, right now, on the streets of Bolivia. The army were shooting down supporters of Evo Morales just yesterday. Has that continued into today?
Today appears to be quite peaceful. There are no cars in the street. People are having to queue for hours for food. I just saw images right now of the army heading up to El Alto. El Alto is a city that has fiercely opposed a coup, and they've organized themselves and they've blocked almost every other corner. They've blocked it. They've blocked all the access to La Paz. There might be still one access to La Paz to the city. They've also blocked the distributor of gasoline, which is why the reason for why there's no cars in La Paz moving around. A teleférico, which is the cable cars, appears to be working. And as I was saying, I just saw some images of the army heading up to El Alto, so we're a bit worried about what could happen up in El Alto and this afternoon.
What was this all about, please? Tell us what you think was the reason for the overthrow of the extremely popular and beloved, actually, President Morales.
What's the reason? I think everybody's trying to understand that at the moment. It's definitely a well-planned, organized, and financed coup. The reasons for the coup, I think, come from you can look at who the leaders of the coup are and what their interests are, and I think there was a deep hatred, possibly for growing towards the president, towards the indigenous movement, their empowerment over the years, and I think there was a resentment in the middle class and the better off classes. Looking at the leaders of the coup, you've got Luis Fernando Camacho, and he comes from Santa Cruz. Santa Cruz is the most economically well-off region of Bolivia. And himself, his family are owners of gas. And in 2006, Evo Morales nationalized the resources. So we know there that Fernando Camacho, his family business was nationalized by the government, so he lost out there on his private finance. We also know that Santa Cruz has always been quite racist, and in 2008 there was a movement to split the country so that they would be their own independent and they wouldn't have to share the country with Indians. I don't know if many people know about
this seems to be a theme, doesn't it? This usurper who is now masquerading as the president. She talked about the Indians, their religion, their symbols, and so on, that there was no place, she said, for the devil, for Satan in Bolivia. They should go up to the mountains and stay there. This seems to imply an ethno-religious supremacist angle or dimension to all of this. Is that how you see it?
Definitely. The movements also that Luis Fernando Camacho comes from, Unión Juvenil Cruceñista, it's a paramilitary group. It's not known as that in Bolivia, but other human rights organizations have classified it as a paramilitary group. And they're very fundamentalist, and they use the Bible and Christ and religion to motivate their followers to as an ideology. They're fundamentalists, and yes, it's something that has made many people angry here in Bolivia. The fact that when the coup happened, they immediately removed the Wipala flag. The Wipala flag is the multicolored flag, which represents the indigenous communities. And that flag is, you don't just use it in Bolivia. That flag is also seen in Colombia, in Peru, in Chile. It could, because it represents the indigenous communities. And with the government, under his government, he's made it a national symbol.
Now, what's going to happen next if you're able to speculate about that? They said that we're going to have new elections, but that President Morales cannot contest them, even though he won the last one by a clear 10 points. And in fact, they've said that they will arrest Evo if he comes back to Bolivia. Do you expect them to have these elections? And if so, how meaningful would they be if the president was not allowed to contest them?
Well, that's something that we have to see. I think they have to have elections. They're trying their very best so that, yes, Evo Morales doesn't participate, and also they don't want the party to participate. There is a massive media campaign to criminalize the MAS party and their sympathizers. They call them vandals and criminals because they're deciding to block the country, block access to the cities. And it's their protest, isn't it? But the media is just calling them vandals and criminals, and they shouldn't be allowed to participate in the next elections. So that's what the fight is going to be. The fight is going to be allowed to participate in the elections. And also the MAS has to decide if Evo Morales is going to be their candidate, or if it's going to be somebody else. That's not quite clear. The opposition have made it clear they do not want Evo Morales because they know he will win again. But that I think I see potential for more violence and more repression in the future.
Me too. Stay safe. Thank you very much indeed. Alejandra Cazaz on the line there from Bolivia. On the line from Cheshire is Wayne. Let's hear from him. Go ahead, Wayne.
Hi, George.
Hi.
I was a bit concerned, and I think it was incorrect for you to say that Prince Andrew, if you were an advisor, that you would have advised him not to do the interview.
Yeah.
And it's a
Not
shame
much chance
also.
of me being his advisor, of course, but if he'd asked me, I would have said, you're making a huge mistake.
Yeah, well, what I'm trying to get at is I'm sick to death of these advisors advising people in the public eye to what they should and shouldn't say. I think it's a massive problem to democracy. I'm losing trust because as soon as anyone says anything on the news, am I thinking, right, what have their advisors said? So I think advisors should be called out. The question is, and don't take this the wrong way, have you been advised what you can and can't say tonight, George?
You obviously don't know me. Who could advise me? Who could advise me on what I can and can't say? Don't be soft, lad. Nobody's ever advised me what I can and can't say, and nobody ever will.
That's good.
Be sure about that. Anyway, have you got a better point to make? Go on.
Well, that is the whole point. The BBC News and Sky News have all agreed with what you've said, that he shouldn't have done the interview. But let's just sit back and think about it.
Do you think he should have done it, Wayne?
No, I think the problem is the advisors. That's what I'm trying to get at. How can we trust anyone saying anything when we know they've all got advisors and telling them what they should?
Well, people advise people all the time, but the people saying it are responsible for what they say. Andrew is responsible for what he said last night, not what anyone else might have advised him.
I disagree with that. I think all the royal family are controlled, what they can and can't say, what they can and can't do.
Controlled by whom?
Controlled, I don't honestly know, controlled by people above them. organisations.
Who's above them?
What
are you driving at?
Want to keep?
Are we in shape-shifting lizard territory?
Oh
here?
no! Don't go down that road.
Well, who above them?
Made by the TA in 1952.
Who above the royal family are telling them what to say and do?
In my opinion, Freemasons 33 degrees of Malta. That's in my opinion.
Okay, thanks very much. Let's go to Amanda in London. Go ahead, Amanda.
Oh, hello. Good evening, Mr. Galloway.
Good evening to you, ma'am.
I just wanted to raise something that I thought was quite strange when I was listening to Kirsty Walk interviewing Miss Maitlis on Friday evening before the interview took place with Prince Charles the next day.
I didn't see
well,
that.
It was I just saw a snippet of it. And the thing that I thought was very strange was that apparently the negotiations for the interview had been going on for 6 months. Now, Epstein was first arrested on the 6th of July. He died in August. Why would this negotiation need to take place 6 months before, which sort of seems to have coincided with Prince Andrew's last conversation with Ghislaine Maxwell in May of 2019.
Yeah, maybe she's the one that advised them he should go on television.
Well, possibly they knew, or perhaps possibly they had some foreknowledge of the arrest that took place in July, and they were trying to put forward some sort of PR coverage for what they've been up to.
Yeah, well, it hasn't worked, has it? I mean, the story isn't going to go away. It's going to run and run. And now,
exactly. I think
now he's damaged, very damaged goods.
I think it's going to get worse and worse for them. And I think that's probably the best thing to have happened, because this thing needs to come out into the open.
Yes, it's all a bit puzzling. It's puzzling on two levels. Why did any of it come out at all? And if it was going to come out, why hasn't all of it come out? You know, arresting Epstein was quite surprising to me, because it ran the risk of him blowing the whistle on a hugely important segment of the American elite, not just the American elite. But having arrested him, it seems to me that they panicked and wanted him dead very quickly, don't you?
Well, I think something seems to have backfired. I just wonder if Epstein was somebody it was better to get rid of him, because worse and worse stuff was behind it. But certainly I can't understand why it would be taking 6 months with Newsnight to negotiate the interview with Prince Andrew when the arrest took place about 4 months ago.
Yeah, although the arrest is not the only thing in the proposed interview, because we already knew before the arrest what Andrew's relationship with Epstein was.
Exactly, but particularly in 2015, but that had died a death to a great extent. I think they thought that Prince Andrew in June was standing on the balcony at the Choosing of the Colour with the Queen.
Yeah.
He was taking Donald Trump to Westminster Abbey, and he was very much coming to the forefront again. And then, of course, this happened in July.
I think he'll have to be retired now, don't you?
I think so. I think I heard that was being suggested, that the whole royal family needs to be slimmed down if it's going to be taken any further forward.
Stay away from Pizza Express if you want to slim down. Thank you, Amanda, for that lovely call. onair@ggmoats.com is the email address, onair@ggmoats.com. Lots and lots of emails, I must say. 3,295 votes were cast. 5% of you thought Andrew was believable, and 95% of you thought that he was not. Okay, the third hour beckons. After the news, I'll be with Adam Garrie, formerly known as the cleverest man in England. Hashtag Ask Adam. I'm going to have one or two questions for him myself. Stay tuned.
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
This is Dominic Carter, a political reporter in New York for Verizon Fios TV News.
This is Dr. Bill Honigman of Progressive Democrats of America, PDAmerica.org.
Hey, everybody. My name is Tim Black of The Tim Black Show.
This is Tom Luongo of Gold Coats and Guns.
Hello, this is Benny Johnson.
Hi, this is Juanita Broderick, author of You'd Better Put Some Ice on That.
This is Jamal Thomas from the Progressive Soapbox.
Hey, this is Raheem from D.C.
This is Rachel Blevins, a correspondent with RT America, and you're listening to Fault Lines with Nixon and Stranahan.
When I'm waking up in the morning and I'm looking for what's on the queue for the day, I tune to Fault Lines with Nixon and Stranahan.
The wokest radio show for your wokest AM.
These guys are the best in the business and experts when it comes to policy.
They're bringing you the top headlines with an angle that you won't see in the mainstream media.
Fault Lines is the greatest show on the radio. I enjoy immensely talking with Lee and Garland. They always treat me from either side with due respect, and it's a wonderful conversation.
The best morning news show in America. Fault Lines with Nixon and Stranahan.
Lee and Garland speak truth to power from the depths of the swamp itself, right here on Radio Sputnik.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com.
Radio Sputnik News.
A television interview with Britain's Prince Andrew over his involvement with the U.S. sex offender Jeremy Epstein has been savaged by media pundits and a former advisor to the royal family. The hour-long interview, which aired on BBC last night, was an attempt by the prince to clear his name over allegations that he had sex with a 17-year-old girl, Virginia Roberts, who is allegedly Epstein's sex trafficking victim. Andrew denied the claim when it was put to him. He said that on the night he had been alleged to have slept with Roberts, he was actually at a Pizza Express restaurant with his 2 children. Andrew visited Epstein at his mansion in New York in 2010, shortly after Epstein had been released from prison for sex offenses. At one point in the interview, the prince described Epstein's crimes as unbecoming. The prince's decision to speak so candidly about his relationship with Epstein, who died in prison after he was charged with sex trafficking, and answer allegations about sex with Roberts was widely condemned. The former Buckingham Palace press officer, Dickie Arbiter, described the interview as excruciating. It's understood that Andrew's doctor resigned from his job 2 weeks ago after advising the prince not to go ahead with the interview. The UK government and British armed forces have been accused of covering up the killing of civilians by British troops in Afghanistan and Iraq. An investigation by the BBC's Panorama program and the Sunday Times newspaper spoke to 11 British detectives who said they found credible evidence of war crimes. Britain's Ministry of Defense rejected what it called the unsubstantiated allegation of a pattern of cover-ups. Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab said all of the allegations that had evidence have been looked at. He said the right balance had been struck over decisions whether or not to investigate alleged war crimes. The new evidence has come from inside the Iraq Historic Allegations Team, which investigated alleged war crimes committed by British troops during the occupation of Iraq, and Operation Northmore, which investigated alleged war crimes in Afghanistan. The government decided to close both down after a lawyer who had taken up more than 1,000 cases of alleged abuse, killings, and torture was struck off as a solicitor following allegations he had paid fixers in Iraq to find clients. But former detectives claim that this was used as an excuse to close down criminal investigations. The Conservative Party has said that if it is returned to power in Britain's general election next month, charges will not be brought against soldiers in the allegations are more than 10 years old, as these are. Next, police in Paris have arrested more than 100 people as protests to mark the first anniversary of the anti-government Yellow Vest movement turned violent. Yellow Vest rallies took place nationwide on Saturday, a year after they first erupted. Some of the worst violence seen in months erupted in the city. Tear gas and water cannons were used by police, where thousands of protesters thronged the streets of the French capital. France's President Emmanuel Macron and his government have been accused of ignoring the needs of ordinary citizens. The protests first erupted in November last year over fuel price rising, but grew to cover wider grievances including low wages, living costs, and economic inequality. At least 200,000 people have protested against the Czech government in the capital, Prague. Demonstrators are calling for Prime Minister Andrej Babis to resign over allegations of fraud. It's alleged Babis used European Union subsidies for his private business, a Czech conglomerate called Agrofert, something he denies. The protest yesterday was held on the eve of the 30th anniversary of the Velvet Revolution, which ended communist rule in what was then Czechoslovakia. The death toll in Bolivia continues to rise after violent clashes between security forces and supporters of former President Evo Morales. On Friday, security forces opened fire on supporters of Morales in Sacaba, killing at least 8 people. A doctor in the city said that most of those killed and injured had bullet wounds. It's believed a total of 19 people have died since the disputed election on October 20th. Yesterday, UN Human Rights Chief Michelle Bachelet warned that violence in Bolivia could spin out of control. Morales resigned last week over allegation of voter fraud in the general election and fled to Mexico. And finally, the U.S. businesswoman embroiled in controversy over the extent of her relationship with Boris Johnson claims that the British Prime Minister treated her like a gremlin when she asked for help on handling the media. Jennifer Curry claimed Johnson snubbed her and hung up on her when she tried to make contact with him several times. She said, "I don't understand why you've blocked me and ignored me, as if I were some fleeting one-night stand or some girl that you picked up at a bar, because I wasn't, and you know that." Well, that's Sputnik News. I'm Emily Horn.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
It is the mother of all talk shows, and I'm joined by Adam Garrie. Hashtag Ask Adam. The cleverest man in England has some questions to answer, so far as many of the listeners and viewers are concerned. There's also another poll up. Are you now more or less likely to eat at a Pizza Express? Vote now. More likely or less likely.
Highly
Do you think
likely.
this has all done Pizza Express some good? They were in a bit of trouble. Does the patronage of His Royal Highness do them any good, do you think?
Well, I think that the only people or organization, as it were, to come out of this well is Pizza Express. The royal family, the BBC, the American judicial system, society at large, all came out much worse for this interview. But Pizza Express, which was going into administration, talking about closing over half of their locations, now they're in the news. And quite uniquely in this whole saga, they're blameless. They didn't do anything wrong except serve pizza, allegedly, to a very important person. So there's no such thing as bad publicity, but in the case of Pizza Express, they've really boxed this one up.
Yeah, I suspect that you're right. Will Carpenter says more will come out in the wash. And I believe Andrew and Chums have made a lot of dirty laundry, metaphorical and literal. It is a remarkable thing that this story has multiplied, has become such a big story. When, in the beginning, when I was banging on about it on here, not many people in Britain had heard anything about it.
No.
And now it's dominating the airwaves, dominating the front pages. Is that because people are already bored by the general election, do you think?
I think that's one of the reasons, and I think the timing of the BBC to drop this sort of political, because after all, it is political, whether we want it to be or not. I don't want it to be. I think the timing was very suspect, to put it mildly, and I think that it was very crude and very vulgar at its worst. But the BBC pretends not to be a business because we have to pay for it under penalty of imprisonment, but it is a business just with a shotgun-style subsidy. And as such, they know that sex in its various forms sells. And this one really sold, not only because I think the story would have always got people talking one way or the other, but I really think there is election fatigue. It's becoming increasingly clear that if the election were held tomorrow, as opposed to the 12th of December, the final vote wouldn't change at all. People have made up their minds. This election frankly, has been going on since June of 2016, and everyone just wants it over with.
Well, let's review the scene, the election scene. The opinion polls are now showing a stretching lead for Boris Johnson. If you take them across an average, Labour's on roughly 30%. The Conservatives are on 40% or more, and today's paper's 45%, which is a very high number, I must say. If that were to be sustained, with the Brexit Party falling not just into single figures, but into UKIP territory, then Boris Johnson would have a simply enormous majority, a three-figure majority of the kind that we thought we wouldn't see the likes of again. On the other hand, Labour has its manifesto to come out. They're talking it up. It's likely to have a lot of radical and interesting elements to it. The right will attack it as big spend, reckless economics, and so on. The left will try and bring forward enough electoral incentives to different sections of their potential constituency to get them to vote. So that, for example, free broadband on a nationalised spectrum is likely to be welcomed by young people and by people under the age of 50, although there's lots of people over 50 using the internet. There's the dental promise that now your first visit to the dentist will be paid for on the NHS, because it is has been well attested that many people are no longer going to the dentist because of the cost of it, and therefore, if they ever do have to go, the cost is going to be very much greater. So Labour's preparing its election manifesto launch. The Conservatives and their press are running a full-scale bombardment of Corbyn and his friends and his historical positions. So far, according to the polls, the Tories are winning comfortably. What's your view?
I think that it's more or less always been Boris Johnson's election to lose for a number of reasons. This election is going to be less about policy than just about any election since 2001, which was just Blair's victory lap, which wasn't very hard when you're running around the bald scalp of William Hague with or without one of those silly hats that he wore on the log ride.
Backwards.
But, well, indeed. But, well, that election it took place at a rather placid time. This is anything but placid. It's a political disaster on the verge of a global economic disaster. And frankly, I think there's a big social disaster coming too, because the cohesion of society that was tottering ever since the end of the Cold War is about to go off the edge in a big way. Not soon, but sooner than a lot of more mild-minded people would like.
Even here, even in mild-mannered Britain?
I think so. Obviously, not as bad as in France, not as bad as in heavily armed America, not as bad as in other parts of Europe like Germany, where Merkel has made a mess of things. But I think unless there is someone or something that comes around to say, we've got to get back to cohesion, we've got to get back to mild-mannered, there's hysteria in the air. And if some countries are prone for it, Britain's frankly embarrassing when it becomes hysterical, because Britain doesn't do hysterical well, and the only thing worse than doing a bad thing good is doing a bad thing terribly. So all of these things are the storm clouds gathering on the horizon. But back to the election, I think it's Boris's to lose, because the Brexit issue is going to define the next 20 years at least of this country, and I don't think within 5 years the issue will even be settled in terms of the mechanics of it. The trade deals that are going to be necessary are going to take a lot longer than people thought, not because they need to, but because of the hopeless incompetence that has grown up around Brexit since 2016. Because the issue's big, I think that Boris is going to win, because he's cloaked himself in Brexit. He knows that he needs to make some form of Brexit happen to retain this mandate that I think he's going to get. And the other parties are essentially just spinning round in circles, trying to do something to stop the Boris train from accelerating, but I don't think they're having much luck.
Professor Sir John Curtis said yesterday that the chances of Labour winning the election are zero or close to zero. But that's not what this election is about. This election is about whether we'll have a Tory majority government or a hung parliament.
Yes.
Whether, therefore, we will Brexit or whether we're right back into another 12 months, maybe more, of endless agony over Brexit. So, in a way, according to Professor Curtis, the possibility of a Jeremy Corbyn victory as the Prime Minister of a majority Labour government is virtually zero. And I think the facts so far, things can change, seem to buttress that. But are you ruling out a hung parliament?
Oh, no. It's very much possible, but I don't think it's very probable. It's one of the only two possible outcomes, and in that sense I agree with Professor Curtis. I think that as the election goes on, the following would need to happen to increase the probability of a hung parliament. One, the Tories would need to put their feet even worse than they've been putting them, because the Tory campaign has been atrocious.
It's been dreadful. It's not been any better than Theresa May's.
It's even worse in some ways than Theresa May, because with Theresa May, she helped people lower their expectations and she delivered. With Boris, people were expecting to be dangling from a high wire, waving the Union flag, but it's essentially just been a series of shambolic visits. It's as though someone in Tory party headquarters is saying, where can we send Boris where he's going to get heckled by someone? Well, if we make it here by 5, we can make it here by 7, get a good bit of heckling in by 9. And so it would need, if it's this bad, the Tory campaign, and the Conservatives are still doing so well in the polls, it's going to need to take something far bigger than the various assets of Miss Curie to derail this train.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned her. I was about to ask you about her, the Woman Scorned tour.
Yes.
I don't know what she has, what material she's got, but it was pretty unmistakable what she said today. She said to Boris Johnson, you've treated me like a wet rag, you've wrung me out, you're treating me like a one-night stand. I was your advisor on technology matters for 4 years, and now you don't want to know me, you're hanging up the phone, and so on. These are quite dangerous currents, don't you think?
Yes and no. I mean, Harold Macmillan was famous for building council houses, and I think Boris Johnson is already developing a reputation for erecting the Heartbreak Hotel. So I think that beyond that, it's not going to come to much. It's going to be a topic of scandal, but it sort of pales in comparison to the whole Epstein matter, because at this point, and I don't take any pleasure in saying this as a social conservative, an extinct ideology, but let's keep a few dinosaurs like me around here in Jurassic Park while we can. In an era, for example, as recently as the 60s, Profumo did a lot less, but was chastised a lot more. It brought down a government, where today, whenever some sort of sexual scandal comes up, people just cross their fingers and say, please don't let it be children or animals. Please don't let it be children or animals. And so I think that that's what people will see.
So you think just water off his back?
I'll put it this way. If she were going around tour selling a book or selling a story, which I presume is what she's about to do, and it had the words Epstein in the title of the event, she'd sell more tickets. I'll put it that way.
Yeah. Let's hear from PG in North London on the general election. PG, welcome.
Hello, George. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
George, firstly, it's a pleasure to talk to you. My father was a big fan of yours. He's not around anymore, but it's really nice for me to be able to ask you a question, and also to have some input from Adam as well. Now, there's a lot being said about MPs not representing the people. Now, what doesn't sit well with me is you have people who are selected to be MPs in constituencies that they have no track record or no knowledge of. For example, I saw Luciana Berger. She was an MP for Wavertree in Liverpool. So suddenly she has abandoned all her constituents, and now she's fighting for Finchley and Golders Green. Another point, George, is, for example, if you're looking to fight for the seat of West Bromwich, what do you have in common with the local people in West Bromwich? Do you know much about doctors' waiting times? Do you know how many planning applications were received? Do you know whether the traffic junctions are working or not? I really feel that putting people just because a seat is a safe seat is not the right thing to do. I think MPs should only represent or fight for an election if they are born in a constituency. And maybe
that would be terribly parochial, I think. I should tell you that I announced a couple of weeks ago I have a self-denying ordinance on discussing my own election campaign in West Bromwich East. So I won't be answering your questions except to say that I'll be speaking on Friday evening at 7 o'clock in the Working Men's Club in Dudley Road in West Bromwich, just round from the clock tower. And I'll be addressing any points that anyone has, including the ones that you have raised here. The idea that one should only stand for election in a place that you were born would, of course, have changed the history of the entirety of British politics. Jeremy Corbyn was not born in Islington. Boris Johnson was not born in Uxbridge. He
was born in New York City.
He was born in New York City, so he'd be running in the US. No, I really don't think that is the point. I don't think an MP is a councillor. I don't think an MP is hired by the electorate only for their familiarity with the pavements and the potholes, but to opine on, make judgments on, and make progress on the great national and international issues that the country faces. That's my view. Let's hear Adam's.
Well, you don't need a hole in your head to know that you would want a doctor capable of mending that ailment should it occur. And so this whole parochial notion of localism, of devolution, all of things which I totally and 100% oppose, I think needs to go out the window. This country should return to being a fully unitary country where people who are elected members of parliament are elected because of their character, because of their ability, because of their intellect, because of their track record, because of their ethics, rather than about the fact that they're mates with the publican in Birmingham or that they went to school with the miller in East Yorkshire. And when you look at the history of some of the greatest parliamentarians that achieved the most for constituents at a constituency level, these are frequently people that had no kind of affinity and no kind of historic connection with the constituency, but they got the job done, they did the work, they had the ability. So this sort of parochial, it's almost political and constitutional Luddism, which in many ways is the logical conclusion of all of this devolution nonsense, because if we turn every little town into a political ghetto, it shuts the people there out from the opportunity of having the best possible MP they could have, and it also restricts clever MPs to the places they're born, whichever region of the country that happens to be.
Sorry, PG, no takers for your thesis here tonight, I'm afraid. Let's hear from the lovely Tina, a legend in Shepherd's Bush. Go ahead, Tina.
Hi, George. Good evening. Great show. I just want to take an issue with Adam yesterday. He doesn't like Corbyn's new policies of free internet for all, and he's called it a crackpot idea. And we had a bit of a back and forth yesterday on Twitter, and I just wanted to carry it on because my Twitter jammed. So, what's crackpot?
Well, tell me first, and then Adam will no doubt respond. Why you think this is such a great policy? How many votes do you think are in it?
Well, a poll yesterday yesterday said 70% really want this, and they really think this is a great policy. Why I think it's a great policy, there's many people in this country who still aren't connected to the internet, George. And these days, the internet is a necessity. It's not a luxury, as Adam described it. And many people have to use it to apply for jobs if they're unemployed. If you want to apply for universal credit, you have to have the internet to go through the 50-page forms, etc., etc. And I just think it's a really, really outdated and pompous thing to say that it's a luxury, not a necessity.
Well, whether it's a necessity or not, Adam, is obviously debatable. It's a good thing. The internet is a good thing.
I'm not so sure. I used to think it was, but I see it increasingly as something that's atomizing society, that's stupefying society. It's essentially becoming the Soma, the Huxleyan Soma of this epoch. And people who fear a dystopian future, and I'm certainly one of them, are frequently asked, who got the prediction better? Was it Orwell with 1984, or was it Huxley with Brave New World? And most people, for at least the last 20 years, who have looked at this objectively, think that Huxley got it right. People are stupefying themselves, so much so that they're voluntarily putting the chains on them. So there's no need for the 2 minutes of hate. There's no need for the brainwashing. People are doing it themselves. And the internet it's a kind of psychological narcotic. It cuts people out from the real world. It allows gangs of ideologues to essentially engage in sub-intellectual onanism, to borrow a word from Bojo, not that he or I would know anything about that. It allows them to engage in these activities, and I think that it's bad for politics, it's bad for education, it's bad for the family. It's good for some things.
Well, but nobody would be watching or listening to us now.
It's an exception. It's a noble exception indeed, a noble exception.
And our History Boys series would never have had the people were talking to me about it in Pakistan over the weekend. They love it there, the History Boys. I mean, it allows us to get our point of view across, Tina to get her point of view across in a way that would never be possible if we were reliant on the big media houses and their multi-billion-dollar investments in media empires.
Well, those were the Soma of those days. I'm not in any more favor of that than I am of the internet, and where I think the internet is maybe 75% negative and the rest positive, the old media is probably 90%, if not more, negative. So I take a fairly grim outlook on all of these things, and I think that one good thing about this election that I think might vindicate this thesis is that this election is not going to be won or lost on Twitter. It's not going to be won or lost in the mainstream media. It's not going to be won and lost on Fleet Street. It's going to be won and lost in the street, in working men's clubs, in pubs, in charitable houses, in religious institutions, in the family sitting room, what's left of it. People have had enough because they realize that there's pig swill from the mainstream media, pig swill from the Soma internet, pig swill from Fleet Street, and I think people are going to make up their own minds with a little help of the few bright sparks in the internet and the even fewer bright sparks in the 20th century media, let's call it that. But I think one important thing about this election is that the human spirit, where emotion is able to lead people to a rational decision, even without all of the details and without being able to necessarily articulate the ones that are there, this spirit of a human condition which refuses to die so quietly, the Winston Smith condition, we can call it, to go back to Orwell, I think the election will prove that one way or another at a constituency by constituency level, more importantly than even the overall outcome.
Yeah, I certainly agree with you that the national opinion polls are much less important than what the state of play is in the regions, in the towns, in the cities. Yeah. There it's very much less good for Tina, I'm afraid. Tina, if you're still there, last word to you. No, we've lost her. Now, you can vote on my Twitter page, at George Galloway. It's still being misspelt on my screen here. I have no idea who can't spell the word George. Anyway, on my Twitter page, at George Galloway, Tell me if you're more or less likely to eat at Pizza Express now that you know you might bump into Prince Andrew there. I saw a brilliant meme on Twitter, which was a street name, Prince Andrew's Close, which is not so much a street name as a warning. So let's take a quick break and we'll continue with Adam this discussion.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com.
Tune in every Thursday to Loud and Clear with Brian Becker for the regular segment called Veterans for Peace, where we focus on the contemporary issues of war and peace that affect veterans, their families, the country, and the world as a whole. Veterans for Peace President Jerry Condon joins the show every Thursday. Hear about this and more every Thursday right here on Radio Sputnik.
We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
The mother of all talk shows, with George Galloway. The world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
Let's do some calls. 02077-982-255. American calls. We only had one from the US. 001-757-744-4480. Let's take some calls, but you and I can kick around some of the printed material. Do I believe Prince Andrew? Probably not. Am I really bothered? I'm not going to read the rest.
Oh, dear.
Too rude. Equality for all. Maybe he can be extradited to the US with Julian Assange and given a 200-year prison sentence. Oh, wait. Julian's crimes of exposing US crimes are much worse than allegedly being a paedophile. John the Welsh, it will be talked about for a while. People will lose interest. Andrew will disappear into the shadows. You know how it is. Forgotten about. Ryan Martin says, how can anyone watch that interview and find him even remotely believable? Neil Jono says he played the mental health card, so it must be the truth. All of us Falklands veterans suffer with it. And on email, George, instead of promising broadband as a panacea for the nation's ills, what about free or much cheaper water? Vastly more important to every single person in this country. Regards, Dennis. Why is it that we have to learn from a gilet jaune that Julian Assange's solicitors are failing him? Surely there are things Doughty Chambers should be doing now to appeal his outrageous treatment. Shame on them, said Simon. Well, I don't endorse the point that was made earlier. I've no idea whether the legal team are doing a good job or not. It's really up to Julian and WikiLeaks, who represents them, and what they should be doing. We mustn't allow ourselves to be divided, you know, by the criminals that want to criminalize free speech. George, I'm one of the WASPy women and would like your thoughts on our fight for justice, says Angela from Newport. Well, I've been a supporter of the WASPy women right from the very beginning and have had them as guests in one form or another on all of my shows. George, I love the show. I'm confused by the appearance of popularity of the SNP, Remain and Independence in Scotland. Whenever I talk to my family and friends back in Scotland, they are all in on Brexit and somewhat disgusted and ashamed of Nicola Sturgeon. This is from Nick, who's a Scot living in Los Angeles. Let's talk about Scotland. The SNP are on track to win a huge number of seats. The Tories to lose some, perhaps not as many as originally feared. But Labour in Scotland has reached an historic low point that it makes me have to pinch myself to realise it's real. When I was the chairman of the whole Labour Party in Scotland, Labour ran everything in Scotland. And now they're at 9% in the opinion polls, behind the Tories on double that, way, way, way behind the SNP. Do you think that we're on a motorway with no exit ramp towards independence?
Well, Red Clydeside is turning the same ginger hue as Mrs. Sturgeon's hair, it does seem. I think that the SNP vote during this election could be interpreted in one of two ways. And even though they seem contradictory, I'm not so certain in the long term that they are. On the one hand, it's the lost gasp of Scottish voters saying that we don't like Brexit, we don't like the kinds of people on the Conservative front bench, we don't like the kind of muddled atmosphere of Labour, and we want to assert ourselves with an opinion that is unique, that runs contrary to everything south of the border, whether it's Labour's front bench, the Conservatives' front bench, or Brexit itself. On the other hand, I think that the horrible way in which Theresa May's government managed the Brexit process might be telling a lot of people subliminally in Scotland, including SNP voters, these referenda, these independence movements, these exiting of unions, it's not quite as smooth sailing as people think. Now, don't get me wrong. I think Brexit could have been very smooth comparatively from the beginning if managed by people with brains. Unfortunately, such people weren't available, and when they were, they weren't in power. But the bad taste is sitting there in people's mouths. Questions about currency, questions about borders, hard, soft, questions about fishing. And so I think a lot of these people will think, let's support the SNP, so they give a good bloody nose to what is probably going to be a continued prime ministership of Boris Johnson, but let's not take it too far. And for the SNP leadership themselves, being pragmatists that speak the language of fanatical ideology, I'm not sure they're all too bothered about that. They can be a protest vote, but one with power, just without the kind of responsibility of forming one's own separatist nation.
Good point. Yeah, we've got a nice image of Prince Andrew in Pizza Express. Let's show that. Yes. There they are, and all of them invoking. That's Lee Harvey Oswald, O.J. Simpson, and Prince Andrew, and the aforementioned young American girl. Can't see the rest. Anyway, thank you for that. Ian is on the line in Hounslow. Always worth hearing. Ian, welcome back.
Hello, George. And I've got a bone to pick of Adam, really, over his comment on parochialism and being local Luddites, insisting on your local MP representing the local people who actually elected them.
Go on then, fire away.
We got them there, swanning around in the House of Commons, saying they're voting according to their conscience, which is a misnomer for self-interest. We've got MPs defecting to parties that they weren't originally elected to represent. We've got MPs from constituencies voting to remain when their constituencies largely voted to leave the European Union.
Ian,
we've got people who don't live locally.
Well, Ian, all of that is true. Yeah. All of that is true, but what does it have to do with the idea that you should only be able to stand for Parliament in the place that you were born? You think that will solve that?
No, I think that's a little extreme, but the man's point was the disconnect between the people who put people into Parliament and those people who go to Parliament who no longer represent the people who voted for them, apart from themselves, with their snouts in the trough, claiming expensive claims.
We all agree with that, Ian. Adam agrees with that. I agree with that. You agree with that. As far as I'm concerned, I would have voted out 99% of the membership of the current House of Commons. I might even have gone to the 100, but I certainly would have been in the high 90s.
Can I just lastly, before ring off, I'd like to put 5 questions at Tony Benn. Do you remember the 5 questions that Tony Benn will put to any politician?
Yes, go on.
What power have you got? Where did you get it from? In whose interest do you exercise it? To whom are you accountable? And how can we get rid of you? And they're not answering those questions.
No, I agree. The political class is not just venal, but shrunken. Venal demonstrated amply over the last 3 years of deliberate wreckage of the Brexit decision, but also shrunk. I make no bones about this. When I entered Parliament over 30 years ago, it was a much bigger place than it currently is now. we have a political class that, when we needed it most, when this existential question of Brexit came along, was so bad you wouldn't send them out for a loaf of bread. You wouldn't buy a second-hand car from them. You'd lock up your daughters if they were coming down the road canvassing. We have a shockingly bad political class, but that's not going to be solved by becoming parochial. That was the point that Adam was making. Adam.
Yes, absolutely right. And, for example, I call the Labour front bench the Islington Mafia. I call them that because Islington is no longer just a spot on the map of London, but it's also an ideology. Secondly, I call them that because it's fun. But to get serious about it, not everyone in Islington is Emily Thornberry or Jeremy Corbyn. There are people in Islington who, unlike them, have it quite hard. And there are even people in Islington who voted for Brexit. Shock, but there are a few of them. And so to say that someone who shares a common geography, an accident of birth, is somehow uniquely qualified, and yet someone from even slightly down the road should be prohibited from putting forward proposals and ideas and concepts of representation for a certain area, it's as ludicrous as saying, I want a white brain surgeon rather than a black brain surgeon, irrespective of their qualifications. It's the same principal concept. I reject it all.
Yes, me too. Peter is in Australia. Let's hear from him. Go ahead, Peter.
Hello, George. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks very much for the call. What time is it in Australia now?
It is about 20 to 9.
Oh, okay. Not too bad. In the morning. Yeah, go ahead, sir.
Now, George, what I'd like to do is raise an issue. I've been thinking about you and Chris Williamson because I both, as a measure of solidarity, would wish you both to be returned to the next Parliament. And the thing that occurred to me is there's two aspects of the Australian political system which would be of great use when it comes to your campaigns. Now, that would be, we have compulsory voting and we have preferential voting. Preferential voting would mean that the progressive voters in both those constituencies would have the ability to vote to not give in to this notion that there would be a wasted vote. So someone could vote for Chris, and if he came last, then of course his vote, the second preference would then stand, so they would vote for a Labor Party candidate. I would love to see in the next Parliament progressive members start a debate about preferential voting and also compulsory voting.
Let me ask you about the compulsory voting. That obviously drives the turnout up to the maximum. But is there no feeling amongst people that this is draconian, even tyrannical use of state power to actually force you to go and vote for one or other of them?
But George, you don't actually have to vote. You have to come and get your name marked off. If you don't wish to vote, you can say bugger off to all of them on your ballot paper. You can do anything you want with your ballot paper, but it forces people to come along and at least engage in the political process. And it means a huge amount of money, for example, in the United States, that has to be targeted to people who are alienated from the system to get them engaged, can actually be directed more effectively in trying to persuade the middle ground to more progressive politics.
Good points. Good points, Peter. Yeah, go on.
There's a reason why the Australian Labor Party, one of the oldest Labor parties, oldest Labor Party in the world, was so insistent upon compulsory voting at the beginning of the last century. And I have no doubt, in a relatively conservative country, I have no doubt that combined with preferential voting has meant that far more progressive governments than otherwise would have been the case have been elected in Australia. And there's a reason why Conservatives in Australia want to get rid of both of them, but thus far the people have been sufficiently attracted to protecting those two aspects of our system to ensure that the Tory forces and forces of reaction in Australia have not been able to get rid of those two aspects of our system.
Great call, Peter. Thank you very much indeed for it. Adam, if there is a hung parliament, one upside of that would be, for me, that it would be bound to increase discussion and perhaps resolution on the need to reform our voting system. A first-past-the-post voting system can mean, has meant, that, for example, UKIP get 4 million votes in the past, not a single member of parliament. Someone gets 9 million votes and gets hundreds of members of parliament. The correlation between the number of votes you get and the number of seats you get is so wildly skewed.
Indeed, and the current system that we've got of one candidate per constituency is really only since the late 1940s, when the final multi-member constituencies were abolished by the Attlee government. Before that, there were various kinds of multi-member constituencies, and I think it worked quite well. There's some very bad forms of proportional representation, and there's some very good forms. There's hybrid models like in Singapore, where you've got some party-list proportional representation and some single-seat constituencies. So I think some sort of combination might be necessary and quite possibly advisable. And there's no doubt about it, if there is a hung parliament, which, given the Brexit issue, won't end in any more prettier fashion than the last parliament, which wasn't even, it was elected as a hung parliament, then it's sort of governed as a Tory majority with a DUP tail, which attempted to wag the dog, but Boris got the last laugh there. But if there's a formal hung parliament where a Labour plurality is reliant on the Scottish Nationalists and the Liberal Party to rule, I think it's inevitable that this discussion will come out.
Yeah, there could very well be trouble over that. Are you more or less likely to eat at Pizza Express? More likely, 38%. So some people quite like to sit down for their pepperoni next to Prince Andrew. And less likely is 62. Just 8 minutes left on that poll. So vote now on my Twitter page. Hi, George. Loving the show, as always. I do not understand why Prince Andrew did not just admit it. It's not ideal, I suppose, a 40-year-old royal having sex with a 17-year-old. But at the end of the day, she was not underage, at least in this country. Andrew was single and not with Fergie. People would not have liked it, but it would have been forgotten soon enough. Bill Wyman dated 13-year-old Mandy Smith when he was 47. Now, that was wrong. If he had said this instead of doing the cannot remember and I don't sweat routine, it would soon have been old news. Your show is the best on the internet, says Thomas Randall. And Paul says, people should make no mistake. The Prince Andrew interview had nothing to do with clearing his own name. He doesn't feel that he's done anything wrong, judging by his lack of empathy. It was purely damage limitation for the royal family. In general, well, if it was, that didn't work so well, did it? Do you think the royal family have sustained strategic damage over this?
I think that the Twitterati mafia and the attitude of the BBC, which was written on every line of the face of the interviewee, was designed to sort of resurrect the hatred of the royal family that became fashionable amongst quite a lot of people after Diana's funeral in 1997, a funeral which itself could have been designed by Arthur Scargill or other Republicans, even though he would have probably done it on the cheap, which would have been an improvement in my book from the absolute shambles of Blairite pseudo-Republican Europeanism that it was. There was definitely some of that was going on, and at a human level, I think everyone's admitting that Andrew did himself no favours, but I think there's another aspect of this, and I think myself and Paul Embry, the left-wing leader of the Fire Brigade Union, if I got the title correct, we were thinking of the same thing. You were sky high somewhere between Pakistan and Britain, which was probably the safest place to be, which isn't frequently stated about these such things, even though things have improved since the 80s. But he said this, the vitriol that people are voicing, it's not even really about about the royal family. It is, but it's about something even bigger because it affects everyone more directly. It's about the fact that this mafioso mentality is throwing out the ancient common law principle of the presumption of innocence. And it reminds me of how important it is when we're talking about Brexit to talk about the common law, which is the finest and most fair legal system that has ever been invented. What we're seeing now is a kind of commercial version of what paused for justice in the Soviet Union, where it wasn't about fair and impartial justice, it was about justice in a trial reflecting the will of the people, the mob. In reality, the will of the people was the will of Stalin or Brezhnev or Gorbachev or whichever tyrant was in charge at that time. But the concept that justice is a popularity contest, when it isn't. Justice is about fairness, impartiality, and about truth. It has nothing to do with what people want. It doesn't even have anything to do with the kind of morality people would want. And we're in dangerous territory if all it takes is a quorum of 12,000 angry men and women on Twitter to condemn someone without due process. And my hat, which I don't have, off to Paul for saying that. And this is one of the areas where people on the left and the right, but who appreciate things like common law, can absolutely see eye to eye.
Patrick is in Louisiana. Let's hear from him. Patrick, welcome.
Good evening, gentlemen. How are you, Mr. Galloway? How are you doing,
By the grace of God, very good. Nice to hear from you. Go ahead.
Nice to hear from you, too.
Always a pleasure. Well, I'm here to pursue my PhD in political science from Galloway Berry University.
Very good. Very good.
I'm calling with respect to Bloomberg's candidacy for the presidency of the United States.
Yes.
20. Do you think, because I look at him as really kind of a wishy-washy, milquetoast, moderate figure who couldn't possibly appeal to the American electorate at large.
No.
It seems to me it really depends on who the Democrats nominate. I tend to believe if they nominate someone on the hard left like a Bernie Sanders, he could possibly appeal to kind of a moderate to conservative Democrats if they still indeed do exist, or, some establishment-type Republicans. But I don't really foresee his candidacy being much of a factor in terms of the outcome of next year's election. What do you and Adam think about this?
Well, I think the only way he could become president is if you could literally buy it in an auction. But let's hear what Adam thinks.
Well, whenever Michael Bloomberg threatens to run for American president, which he does every few years, it's sort of the kiss of death for whichever party he's focusing on more. In this case, it would be the Democrats. There is another theory, though, and for legal reasons, I'm not implicating this to Mr. Bloomberg nor anyone else, but in general terms, very rich people give a certain amount of money to both major political parties in the United States. It's called hedging one's bets. Now, if one is standing in the election himself, he can't do that. And we all know that elections are expensive business in America, but the kinds of contributions expected from these big billionaires is possibly even more expensive. It could just be a massive act of frugality disguised as altruism, but I wouldn't dare implicate Mr. Bloomberg in something as crafty as that.
Thank you, Patrick. Richard is in Manchester. Go ahead, Richard.
Good evening, George. I thank you for having me on the show.
Welcome.
I wanted to ask you a question, please, George.
Yeah.
You've been telling us there's going to be a film called Killing Kelly about the UMD expert who died 3 days before the Iraq War started. I just wondered, my pals were talking about it in the pub last night. Has George got that film ready?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I'm interviewing a rather surprising and unexpected interviewee for the Killing Kelly film tomorrow. I better not tell you who and where, because we don't want any accidents. We don't want any accidents happening. Yeah, it's nearly finished, Rich.
The speaker, Boko, when I was waiting for your show to come on tonight, I got into an interview with Speaker Burko, and you might smile at this. At last he's free to exonerate himself and clear his own conscience because I want to remain. I always wanted to remain. I have always been impartial in all my years as a speaker. And he was being interviewed by the great, I love myself, Alistair Campbell.
Yes.
I don't know whether you say it or not. I know you've been to...
No, I referred to it in my own statement on this John Bercow, Alistair Campbell, which we played earlier in the show. So have a look at it, Rich. But I promise you, you'll love Killing Kelly. And Alistair, Alistair Campbell will not. I've got to go because there's a legend on the line. It's Norma in Bristol. Go ahead, Norma.
Hello, George. I'd just like to make a little point.
Yes.
Apparently, it was called World Kindness Day last Thursday.
Yes.
Not that anybody knew.
Not that anybody paid much attention, no.
No.
Life is short of kindness at the minute.
Yes.
Well, I don't mind disagreement on policies and issues. That's absolutely fine. But what I don't like is these attacks on personalities and unacceptable language. And that loses my respect, I mean, I'm no angel, and I can debate well if it's above the belt. But if it gets nasty, that can hurt people, you know.
And who do you have in mind? Who is your approach
I read different things on Twitter, and if it's sort of personalities, really bad language about them, I just lose respect for those people.
Mm. Well, I mean, up to a point, we can all be in favour of virtue and motherhood and apple pie.
Oh,
and
I'm
so
no
on.
angel.
But, if you ask me to restrain my views on Alistair Campbell or Tony Blair, I'm afraid I'm not able to do that. Neither can I separate their personalities from their political actions. It's not quite as easy to do that as on paper, in theory, it might seem normal. Let's hear from Adam.
Well, my own advice would be if one wants to experience a kinder and gentler style of rhetoric, Twitter isn't the place. Twitter is a place one goes to in search of kindness in the same way that one goes to a brothel in search of chastity. It's just incompatible. But again, this brings me back to my earlier point. Real life, as chaotic and as grim as it's become and becoming, as we were talking about earlier, it's still far better than make-believe land. If real life was as violent as the make-believe Disneyland for psychos that is Twitter, the Tunbridge Wells High Street would look more dangerous than Somalia in 1992, downtown Mogadishu. So let's be grateful for small miracles and that the real life in this country and in most of the world hasn't degenerated to the level of Twitter. And frankly, well, maybe Kim Jong-un is really onto something. It's one of the few countries in the world that doesn't have all this stuff. So maybe this is the art of the deal after all, and maybe Trump and Kim can learn something about that from each other the next time they meet over a fast food meal in Singapore.
Last word. Norma, you still there?
Yes. I can fight like the best of them, George. And the one person that I might not be very nice to is Tony Blair. I agree.
Same here.
Thank you very much, the legend. That is Norma in Bristol. The Great Unwashed said, is it a coincidence that Pelosi suddenly changed her mind on impeachment when she saw that Sanders and Warren looked like the likely nominees of the party? Would the Democrats' establishment rather lose to Trump than see Bernie as president? And Paul Stevenson says, what or whom is behind the decision to stand? No, these are the names of individual candidates. I really oughtn't at this hour to traduce them. A few weeks ago on Moats, when discussing the Hong Kong situation, I found your stance towards the protesters unsympathetic, let's say. Now, because of the violence by the protesters, I'm rapidly starting to understand your stance. Are they overplaying their hand? Well, that's one way of putting it, Adam, isn't it? They have destroyed Hong Kong in plain sight.
Absolutely, and I actually don't think it's going to ever recover. This can't go on forever. It will eventually end, but Hong Kong's reputation has, in a very, very short expanse of time, gone from night to day. It used to be a place admired for its safety, for its luxury, for its investor-friendly atmosphere, and now you're seeing old people being literally set on fire with petrol being thrown upon them. You see arson everywhere and violence, and people thinking, we don't want to go there. And so I honestly think that we're witnessing the beginning of the end of the Hong Kong as we knew it, and the only people to blame are those who are committing the acts of violence.
I'm afraid that's the end of the show. On that somber note, I can't imagine China allowing this to continue for even a few more days because the level of violence against civilians and police alike has reached really catastrophic levels. So don't forget, next Friday, 7 p.m., the Working Men's Club in Dudley Road in West Bromwich. That's where you'll find me. If you are within striking distance of there, do come along. And don't forget, Adam and me will be performing on the 18th of January at the East Kilbride Village Theatre. You can get your tickets online. They're going quite well, actually, considering there's still about 10 weeks to go and we're in the middle of a general election. And then there's Christmas. I think we sold the best part of 100.
I wonder if I should do myself up in the kilt and sporran and the whole thing.
I wonder. That's an idea. Who thinks so? Let me know.
Who thinks I should go?
Go full brigadoon when we bring him up to East Kilbride. Well, it's been marvellous for me. I hope it was for you. And if it was, come back next week at the same time, same place, and bring other listeners. It's goodbye from me and from Adam. Good night.